Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Chapter 101, Rejecting the Marriage. Chapter 101, Rejecting the Marriage. The first to voice out a refusal was actually Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli, who had yet to say anything, paused for a moment and the warm smile on his face stiffened. Everyone was puzzled, except for Zhang Xianji, who secretly felt relieved. Even the emperor would not easily refute the words of Empress Dowager Ida. Even if Imperial Consort Chun was favored, it wasn't to the point where the emperor would defy the Empress Dowager for her. Imperial Consort Chun was usually like a fish in water at the palace, rarely having conflicts with Empress Dowager Ida, and she was also popular with everyone. The Empress Dowager also wasn't close with any consorts besides the Empress, so her life was peaceful. Nobody would have expected that today, the great Jin dynasty's most respected woman would so ruthlessly go against her in front of hundreds of civil and military officials. If just Empress Dowager Ida disagreed, then forget it, but why would Zhang Ruan refuse? With a smile on her lips, Imperial Consort Chun re-examined Zhang Ruan. At first glance, Zhang Ruan bore herself well, and didn't seem like a daughter who was unfavored while growing up. In accordance with Xian Li's evaluation, she merely appeared to be a person with some smarts. But now it seemed as though not only was she smart, but also very bold. Faced with Imperial Consort Chen's smiling eyes, Zhang Ruan returned a warm smile back, courteous and calm. Her eyes contained such a mysterious emotion within that Imperial Consort Chun was stunned for a moment. She'd never seen such an emotion towards herself before. This was a provocation. Not only was it a provocation, it was also full of ambition to win. Empress Dowager Ida's sudden words had stopped Xiao Xiao's action just as he was about to stand. Emotsong wondered, doesn't old Dowager usually never care about these trivial matters? Could it be that eldest Zhang Miss is so lovable that it makes even the Empress Dowager treat her differently? Xiao Xiao fell into thought. His pitch-black eyes locked onto Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan never did things that were uncertain. Thus she must have known that Empress Dowager Ida would refuse. But how? Everyone present was equally puzzled, but no one dared to ask. Zhang Ruan's eyes were cold. She naturally knew why. Imperial Consort Chun thought herself to be invulnerable, so she dared to brazenly invite her into the 8th Prince Fu in front of hundreds of civil and military officials. However, today Zhang Ruan had dressed similarly to Princess Yuan Rong from head to toe. If it was any other topic it would be fine, but they had to bring up marriage. In this situation, how could Empress Dowager Ida not remember how the princess was forced to marry into a foreign country that year? She purposefully dragged things out by appearing unwilling yet embarrassed to refuse, just to remind Empress Dowager Ida of Princess Yuan Rong, who sacrificed her happiness for Great Jin's current stability. Therefore, it was impossible for Empress Dowager Ida to feel indifferent to a forced marriage happening right in front of her. The Empress Dowager would sympathize with her, and at the same time, she would hate Imperial Consort Chun in her heart. In this way, no matter how much Imperial Consort Chun was favored, after offending such a noble lady in the palace, how could it be possible for her to continue to rise in the same way in the future? Her JR life was so precious that she calculated every second. How could she ever be reconciled with this marriage proposed by Imperial Consort Chun? Imperial Consort Chun didn't speak a word. Instead she just looked at the emperor with a pair of beautiful eyes covered with a layer of mist, seeming aggrieved and sad. It would cause anyone to feel distressed for her with just a glance. Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Indeed, the emperor asked, Imperial Mother, why would you say this? Today Ijia wanted to reward Zhang family's eldest daughter. But what Imperial Consort Chun proposes isn't a reward but a robbery. Empress Dowager Ida lightly replied. With some thorns in her words she continued, the Zhang family's eldest daughter is Deputy General Zhang's treasure. How could he bear to marry his sister out so early? Zhang Xianji was a little shocked, but also grateful to the Empress Dowager. Without caring about other things, he first stood and gave a deep salute to her. Many thanks for Empress Dowager's understanding. It is true that this general doesn't wish to leave my sister's side too soon. Sounds of sighing spread throughout the hall. No matter what Empress Dowager Ida said, with her status, no one would dare protest. But Zhang Xianji refuted the emperor's most beloved consort when he only recently gained some merit. The siblings were acting so foolishly it was ridiculous. Naturally, Xiaoyan felt delighted. She only wished that the two would keep offending Imperial Consort Chun until they aroused the Emperor's fury and would be punished to death. On the other hand, Jiang Susu was slightly flushed. When she first heard that Imperial Consort Chun wanted to make Jiang Ruan 8th Prince's consort, she almost fainted. She just couldn't figure out why such a gentle and elegant man would want someone like Jiang Ruan, who was vicious, cruel and scheming, to be his princess consort. It was only when the Empress Dowager intervened that she slowly came back to herself. Needless to say, Jiang Li was extremely jealous. She envied Jiang Ruan's luck, and hated that she didn't have an elder brother who made great contributions to the state. Jiang Dan lowered her head and picked at her fingernails, seeming very nervous. Zhao Guang had just lowered his heart from his throat when Jiang Xianji's words shocked him again. Guan Lianghan frowned, muttering, "This foolish brother. Covering for her like this, others would think she was his daughter." Even the emperor showed a hint of displeasure. It was true that Jiang Xianji made achievements, and he also appreciated brave young men like him, but this didn't mean he could tolerate Jiang Xianji's disrespect towards an imperial consort. If he didn't respect imperial power, then he couldn't stay in the imperial court no matter how great his talent. It was in this tense atmosphere that Jiang Ruan watched Jiang Xianji with a smile. No matter what happened, she would always have Jiang Xianji by her side in this life. He would stay with her without reservations even if he had to turn against the entire world. He'd always protect her without hesitation. When Jiang Xianji saw that Jiang Ruan could still smile, he relaxed a bit. Upon hearing Empress Dowager Ida's words, Imperial Consort Chun laughed. "That's true, Bengong actually forgot. It's just that, Deputy General Jiang, no matter how much you dote on her, there will be a day in the future when eldest Jiang Miss will marry out, right?" She smiled at Jiang Ruan with a gaze as soft as Jiangnan's spring rain, and as cold as the morning dew that slowly burrowed into people's hearts. She said, "Eldest Jiang Miss, don't you agree? Ruan Yang's status is low, and cannot compare to His Highness. This one is ashamed." Jiang Ruan lowered her head, and her tone was quite sincere. Xianli didn't believe this act for a moment. How could Jiang Ruan be someone with low self-esteem? He also wondered why such a young girl would always have a hint of hostility towards him. Xianli considered himself a warm and sociable person with countless young ladies who admired his gentle jade-like countenance. Jiang Ruan was still young and shouldn't have understood matters between men and women, but then where else could the hostility have come from? He hadn't done anything wrong in front of Jiang Ruan before. Could it be because of Jiang Susu? Thinking up to here, he slowly relaxed. If it was just because of Jiang Susu, then it would be simple to get her trust. Imperial Consort Chun sighed softly. "Child, how is this an arranged match? If it wasn't for little 8th to personally request it, why would Bengong suddenly bring it up?" Everyone gave a start. It was actually 8th Prince who brought it up. Xianli restrained his smile, collected himself, and walked to the center of the hall. He was handsome and elegant, with a noble temperament unique to the royal family. With a solemn expression, he knelt before the throne high above. "Imperial Father, those truly are my thoughts." When he glanced at Jiang Ruan, his visage softened like the coming of spring. "Ever since I saw eldest Jiang Miss on the Linglong boat, I was captivated by her splendor, thinking of her daily. I feared that eldest Jiang Miss would reproach me for this impetuous action of mine, so I begged Consort Mother to request to bestow this marriage on my behalf. I am willing to take eldest Jiang Miss as my wife, to protect and love her all our lives." He turned to Jiang Ruan and slowly spoke word by word. "Miss Jiang, are you willing to be my wife?" Such a handsome young man showing off his affections bravely in front of so many officials was attractive enough. Not to mention this was the gentle and well-regarded 8th Prince. Countless young ladies watched on with both love and hate in their hearts. Love for the outstanding young man who wasn't afraid to be affectionate, and hate that they weren't lucky enough to be in Jiang Ruan's place. Jiang Susu's whole body swayed when she heard 8th Prince's words. Her previous joy was instantly replaced by a deep-rooted hatred. There was never a moment where she was more jealous of Jiang Ruan than now. Jealous to the point of madness. How dare Jiang Ruan steal her identity as Jiang Fu's eldest daughter, then steal her beloved? How dare she? Jiang Ruan looked at Xianli indifferently. Since her rebirth, she'd avoided him at every turn. This was the closest to him she'd ever been. It was clear that he didn't speak lightly, and his words were moving and sincere. She thought back to that time in the past, before she traveled against the stream of time, when Ningxue Valley's peach blossoms bloomed so brilliantly. At that time, she didn't know what to do when Xianli stood under a peach tree with a gentle and compassionate smile and said, "Ruana, I truly like you. I truly like you. How moving it is to hear." He said and yet didn't propose marriage. He said he couldn't give her an official status, and she believed him just like that and was even so considerate of his difficulties. In that life, how much did she wish to hear with her own ears for Xianli to say, "Would you be willing to be my wife?" In order to be his wife, in order to be worthy of his love, she took the place of Jiang Susu and entered the imperial palace's murderous depths. She was abused, was wronged, was ridiculed, and was finally stomped into pieces in the dust. How could he not have known? When she was no longer useful and he declared her a demoness who brought ruin, when her haggard self stood in the great hall, he should have remembered that day in Ningxue Valley, below that peach tree, the words that he spoke, "Ruana, I truly like you." In this life she finally heard those words. "Are you willing to be my wife?" But so what? She no longer wished for them. Xianli quietly watched Zhang Ruan, confident that she would agree. Zhang Ruan's mother died early and she'd received little favor since then from her father, plus she'd lived in a rural village for the past 5 years. This kind of person would be exceedingly grateful for even tiny fractions of kindness. To move her heart was too easy. But as he held gazes with Zhang Ruan, his smile gradually faded. What a pair of eyes! They were clear like a mountain spring, yet as cold as black poppies on a desolate land, the emotions within fierce yet calm. They didn't contain any gratitude nor admiration, or any joy at all. It wasn't love but hate. Xianli froze. He didn't see wrong, it was hate, the kind of hate that penetrated deep into the bones, the kind where she wanted no less than to devour his flesh and drink his blood. And there was also disgust, as if he was some rotten thing. His expression slowly stiffened. Why? Under such intense emotions and that complicated look, Xianli's mind became blank and he didn't know what to do next. He even felt a slight fear when facing such a Zhang Ruan. Why is it like this? He tried hard to figure it out, but saw the tender girl before him give a cold sneer and say with some sarcasm, "I am not willing to." With her chin raised arrogantly, Zhang Ruan's tone was courteous yet her expression was like the most noble princess. "This subject gives thanks to your highness' kindness, but doesn't dare accept. Your highness' words are too much for this lowly subject." Saying so, she immediately bowed to the emperor. "May your majesty's wishes be fulfilled." No matter how moving Xianli's words were, her heart remained like a stone, not budging an inch. The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's face deepened, and a light flashed in her eyes. Unexpectedly, she wasn't angry at all. Although the emperor was furious at Zhang Ruan's impudence, he couldn't force her to agree in front of all the officials. He waved his hand irritably. "In that case, just take it as you not having fate together." Xianli's expression was a little unsightly. He didn't expect that today's perfect plan would fall through just because of a few words from Zhang Ruan. As he looked at her curiously, he really couldn't understand why she would refuse him without even thinking, with such a cold face at that. This kind of deep hate, was it really just because of Jiang Susu? Zhang Ruan looked at Xianli's expression and sneered silently in her heart. In this life he still used the same methods as her past life, hoping to buy her heart and use her. Nothing in life was so cheap. Did Xianli think that if he condescended to deceive others, they should be grateful? Emotsong shook his head, saying regretfully, "Eighth Prince is romantic, but it's a pity he met the Zhang family's cruel Mississippi. He's probably going to get ignored, hey?" Xiao Xiao glanced lightly at Zhang Ruan. As a martial artist, his observational abilities had always been good, and he clearly saw that Zhang Ruan looked at Xianli not with love but with hate. She despised him. For a moment there it seemed as though she had disappeared for an instant, as if she didn't belong to this world. Suppressing the thoughts in his heart, Xiao Xiao suddenly frowned. Many years of trusting his intuition told him something in the air wasn't right. He lightly pressed the dagger at his waist, Court officials weren't usually allowed to carry weapons to court, but the emperor personally exempted him from this rule. Xianli gave Zhang Ruan a bow, then retreated to his seat with regret. That dejected appearance made the women present feel profoundly distressed. On the one hand, they rejoiced that Zhang Ruan didn't accept Xianli, but on the other, they hated her for not being able to distinguish between good or bad, making such a gracious person sad. Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xianji just smiled softly. After such a show, the emperor's mood was also quite disturbed, so he waved his hand and ordered, "Start the feast." The serving maids filed in, each holding a tray. The lead palace maid was particularly beautiful and slender, dressed differently from the other maids, and was followed by 2 more palace maids dressed similarly. The 3 approached the emperor. One stood in place, while the other 2 began to serve wine for the empress and empress dowager. A maidservant by the empress took out a silver needle, preparing to dip it in the wine to test for poison. The head palace maid reached over to pour wine, and just as her hand lifted the jug, she suddenly drew a dagger from beneath the white cloth and thrust it towards the emperor's chest. With a pew sound, there came a strong wind with something mixed in that struck the palace maid's dagger aside, preventing the wound from becoming fatal. Turned out to be a golden button. At practically the same time, Xiao Xiao flew up and rushed to the emperor's side. Guan Lianghan froze for a moment, then slammed the table as he stood. How could the womenfolk see such a scene? Piercing screams rose one after another. Among the palace maids dressed in pink, several flew up together, pulling out soft swords from their waist, and charged towards the emperor. "Damned emperor, accept your fate," the women shouted. They were disguised among the serving maids. Today's banquet had hundreds of serving maids present. As soon as such a ruckus occurred, things instantly became chaotic. The emperor received a terrible shock, desperately yelling, "Guards! Guards!" Security around the emperor was so tight that not even a fly could escape, but it was a different story elsewhere. The assassins didn't limit themselves to only aiming for the emperor's life. They slaughtered anyone they could get their hands on. The women and girls had no way to defend themselves, as the assassins target them as well. Endless screams and cries filled the hall, accompanied by the sickening smell of blood. Their cruelty was clear to all. Jiang Su, who had immediately hidden underneath the table, saw a delicate young lady be cut in half right in front of her. Though she was so scared her face turned chalk white, she was still calmer than Zhongli, who was screaming her head off. Also terrified for her life, Xia Yan, who was also hiding beneath the table, tightly held Jiang Su in her arms. The table over them was soon piled up with corpses. Jiang Dan was also terrified, but she neither hid nor screamed like Jiang Li. Amid the chaos, she showed a surprising calmness. After a moment of thought, she picked up her skirt and ran towards the men's section. No one had expected such a twist. Everyone thought that the assassins would stop after the emperor was whisked away, but who knew they would go on a rampage and keep killing haphazardly. It was easy for there to be accidents in such a chaotic situation. Zhang Xianji could no longer see Zhang Ruan's figure, but as a military officer, he couldn't abandon all the women and children. He could only fight the assassins while desperately searching for her. The Zhao family's sons also joined the battle. However, the assassins, who were evidently well prepared for the situation, chased after the women and children instead of confronting the men. In addition, the guards and officers present had to take care to not accidentally hurt their families, but the assassins had no such qualms, allowing them to behave even more unscrupulously. Zhao Jin and Wen Fei, coming from military families, faced the situation with a rare calmness. Zhao Jin said, "Fei, you take a few sisters out first. I'll go look for Wan Mimi and Yinger." When Fei hesitated, "Can you do it by yourself?" "It's fine, I'll be careful." Zhao Jin settled a few girls, then picked up a sword from a slain assassin's body. She coincidentally caught sight of Dong Yinger being forced into a corner by an assailant whose sword pointed towards her chest. Zhao Jin's heart tightened. She hurriedly threw her sword into that assassin's back. The sword was thrown with so much force that the assassin had no chance to dodge, and their sword slipped from their grasp. Dong Yinger had long been scared to tears. Seeing Zhao Jin now was like seeing her life savior. "Jin." Zhao Jin rushed over to help her up. "Are you okay?" However, before she could reply, Dong Yinger's eyes widened when she looked behind her, causing Zhao Jin to feel strange. She turned to see a fierce face staring at her. Die! A silver light flashed. Zhao Jin closed her eyes in despair. Unexpectedly, her body became light. Then she heard the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. When she opened her eyes, her sight was filled with a young man who was holding both her and Dong Yinger. With a long sword in hand, his movements appeared as graceful and smooth like those of a dancer. Zhao Jin had watched her father and elder brothers practice swordplay all her life, but this young man had the most beautiful moves she'd ever seen. His features weren't as rough as her father or brothers, rather they seemed to belong to an elegant and handsome scholar while carrying a trace of boldness. Dong Yinger also became dumbfounded, and a blush arose on her cheeks. Jiang Xing lowered the two and stationed them in a corner. Stay here, don't move. He waded into battle again without turning back. Dong Yinger whispered, "Who's that?" Zhao Jin shook her head. Don't know. Seeing his silhouette disappear into the hall, a hint of anxiety for him arose in her heart. In the midst of all of this, Zhang Ruan's previous actions were greatly surpassed by the arrival of the assassins. The emperor was already evacuated, but the empress was still there in the hall. However, she had many guards by her side, so there was no need to worry. With a turn of her head, Zhang Ruan saw several assassins approaching Empress Dowager Ida. For some reason, there were quite a few of them working together to attack the Empress Dowager. Xianli had just checked on Imperial Consort Shun when he saw this scene and wanted to run over to help. Zhang Ruan raised an eyebrow. Without a pause, when an assassin was about to stab Empress Dowager Ida, she exclaimed, "Empress Dowager." Her actions were faster than her words. She leapt towards the Empress Dowager and pushed her away, replacing her to face the sword. Then she turned to give the stunned Xianli a sneer. "See, the show has just begun." Once everything was under control, Xiao Xiao finally put his dagger away and said coldly, "Keep those who can provide information alive and find out who is behind this." The palace hall was in a mess and filled with the ceaseless wailing of the wounded. There were many innocent women and children who lost their lives. No one anticipated this rebellion today. A nice palace banquet suddenly became a slaughterhouse. The palace servants came to help clean up the dead bodies, and the nearest imperial physician hurried over to treat the patients. Guan Lianghan let out a sigh of relief and patted Jiang Xing on the shoulder and said, "Young man, you dealt with today's crisis very well. You kept your calm in the face of danger, so like myself in those days." But Jiang Xing's mind was not here at all. He frowned and desperately looked around the hall. He couldn't find Zhang Ruan's figure anywhere and was very anxious. After giving it some thought, he went to find Xiao Xiao. "Xiao Wangya, have you seen my younger sister?" To which he replied that Zhang Ruan, along with Empress Dowager Ida, had been escorted by the secret guards to the Xianing Palace. Although Zhang Ruan's sword wound was not deep, it was very long. She had also lost so much blood. Her snow-white complexion was pallid, and her rosy lips had become almost transparent. Seeing her appearance, Empress Dowager Ida summoned the best imperial physician in the palace, and at the same time, she ordered the palace maid to put Zhang Ruan on her couch bed. Lubanimu brand Old Elm New Chinese Arhit Bed Antique Bed Tea Table Combination Study Room. Couch Bed Chuang Ta. Zhang Ruan hadn't lost her consciousness. While in a daze, she opened her eyes and got up from the couch bed. Speaking with great effort, "Empress Dowager, you shouldn't. This subject's status is too low. Things are urgent." Empress Dowager Ida replied quickly, "You've done a meritorious deed by saving Ijia. Ijia is telling you to lie down on the bed, what of it?" Zhang Ruan still tried to speak, but her face became paler and her voice turned hoarse. She seemed to be completely exhausted. She tilted her face slightly, without even having the strength to speak. Upon seeing this, Empress Dowager Ida's face sank and she said angrily, "Why hasn't the imperial physician arrived yet? If he's not coming, Ijia will have his head chopped off." The old maidservant serving at Empress Dowager Ida's side was shocked. Over the years the Empress Dowager temper had been very cold, but today she repeatedly showed abnormal emotions towards this unfamiliar girl. It was really strange. The palace's highly respected imperial physician rushed over quickly. He was confused to hear that it was Empress Dowager Ida's imperial decree. He was even more amazed once he saw an unfamiliar girl lying down on the Empress Dowager's couch bed. He had never seen this girl before, and she was not Princess Hei. Therefore, why was Empress Dowager Ida so nervous? Did she have some close relationship with her? Although he was puzzled, the imperial physician didn't say much. After checking Zhang Ruan's pulse, he got up and said, "This young lady just lost too much blood. Although she was stabbed, luckily the wound isn't deep. If it had been any deeper or more slanted, I'm afraid her life would have been really in danger." Empress Dowager Ida breathed a sigh of relief. The imperial physician spoke again. "I'll write 2 prescriptions. One is for the young lady to drink and the other to bandage the wound. She needs to pay attention to avoid certain foods over the next few days. Otherwise, it will be harmful to the wound recovery." "Will it leave a scar?" Empress Dowager Ida frowned. The wound extended from the shoulder to the chest. After all, she was an unmarried girl. If it left a scar, her future marriage would be affected. Zhang Ruan's skin was as white as snow, and if it was marred by scars, it would be really pitiful. Her behavior was just like Princess Yuanrong today, so Empress Dowager Ida's question was really sincere. The imperial physician wiped the sweat on his forehead. In reply to Empress Dowager's question, if the wound is well cared for, it shouldn't leave a scar. This meant that there was still a chance of scarring. Empress Dowager Ida's eyes were gloomy and her tone was sharp. "I see you can leave. Take someone along to get the medicine." And so, the imperial physician picked up the medicine chest and left the room with a palace maid. Empress Dowager Ida looked at Zhang Ruan, who was lying on the couch bed with her beautiful eyes slightly closed. Her lip color and complexion had the same pallor. She seemed to be enduring great pain but still did not reveal even a frown on her face. It was quite the contrary. Zhang Ruan was still smiling, as if consoling her. Compared with her unflustered charm in the great hall earlier, she looked young and tender with her outer clothing removed. Now she looked delicate and pitiful. Her smile in particular looked so sensible, making people feel distressed. Empress Dowager Ida suddenly thought of Princess Yuanrong. The precocious and sensible Princess Yuanrong never frowned and only smiled at her whenever she got sick so that she, Empress Dowager Ida, wouldn't be worried. Seeing her like this, Empress Dowager Ida's heart softened, her tone gentle. "Why did you block the sword for me?" Zhang Ruan gave her a shy smile and answered softly. "I don't know why, I can't say exactly, but when I saw Empress Dowager I felt a sort of affinity, as if I'd met you somewhere before. And then I didn't think much and just acted." She didn't say anything profound or awe-inspiring. However, the sentence, "as if I've met you somewhere," made Empress Dowager Ida's facial expression change greatly. The idea that she was somehow related to Princess Yuanrong grew stronger and stronger in her mind. She said slowly, "You have done a meritorious deed in saving Aijia. Aijia won't let you suffer this blade in vain." Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. "May I request Empress Dowager to let someone inform my eldest brother? He must be anxious if he can't find me." "Don't worry. Aijia has already sent someone to let him know." Empress Dowager Ida frowned slightly. Zhang Ruan only spoke of informing Jiang Xing, without mentioning Jiang Quan and Xia Yan. After something like this happens, shouldn't a daughter seek out her father? However, she was more anxious to look for Jiang Xing, and didn't even mention Jiang Quan. The siblings born of Jiang family's wife had been known to have a good relationship, but there was something odd about the situation. It was like that earlier in the palace. When talking about Zhang Ruan's marriage, Jiang Quan's facial expression didn't change much. He didn't act like a father at all. Empress Dowager Ida scraped the edge of the bed gently with her nail guard. The ruby emitted a bright red glow. Zhang Ruan closed her eyes and raised the corner of her lips slightly. Some things didn't need clear explanations, especially for the wise ones. After a brief mention, she left it at that. Let Jiang Quan handle the rest by himself. She had known that there would be an assassination attempt today. In her last life, the emperor also held a palace banquet after the flood. Assassins infiltrated while the palace banquet was underway, but that time it was Xianli who saved Empress Dowager Ida's life. Xianli blocked the sword with his body and was seriously injured. At that time, the assassin's mastermind was unknown and the emperor suspected all the princes. The imperial palace was purged overnight. Even the prince who was not present that day because he felt unwell was also affected. Only Xianli, 8th prince, had been declared clean. After all, it was too excessive to be an axe since he was so seriously wounded. As a result, Xianli won Empress Dowager Ida's favor as well as the emperor's trust. He also gained a good reputation for loyalty and filial piety. After entering the palace in her last life, Jiang Ruan learned about this during an idle chat. She felt very anxious to hear the description of Xianli's situation. Now, when she recalled it, there was no lack of doubtful points. As for blocking the sword for Empress Dowager Ida, it was nothing more than a joke. If Xianli had truly been a sentimental and righteous man as rumored, he wouldn't have been able to personally kill so many people. People thought that Xianli would not use himself so ruthlessly. But in fact, Jiang Ruan knew better than anyone that Xianli was a person who concealed his strengths and bided his time. He was very ruthlessly demanding towards himself. In this life, she made sure to make his plan come to naught. Empress Dowager Ida must be saved. But her savior didn't need to be Xianli. Jiang Ruan staked everything on one bet. Today, she was thinking that if she deliberately pretended to be like Princess Yuanrong and saved Empress Dowager Ida's life in the same manner, she would help someone out of trouble as well as do a meritorious deed. There might even be a reward from the palace, although she did not know what it was. But it would be enough to make 8th prince and the Xia family dare not act rashly for the time being. Who would have thought that Xianli intended to marry her after she entered the palace? It was something she did not expect and had never happened in her previous life. Now that she had saved the Empress Dowager, the Empress Dowager's affection for her must have risen up a level. At this time, even if Imperial Consort Chen used a method to compel the Empress Dowager to acquiesce later on, it was impossible for the emperor to grant a marriage for her. As long as she showed the slightest reluctance, Empress Dowager Ida wouldn't agree with it because Empress Dowager Ida had already regarded her as almost like Princess Yuanrong. Besides, she had saved one's life and done a meritorious deed. From now on, Imperial Consort Chen wouldn't be able to say anything. This was definitely a wonderful thing. However, it was not a sure win without any losses. It was so dangerous just now. Now that she thought about it, some lingering fears remained. Even though she was ready to throw caution to the wind and boldly act in that moment, she hadn't anticipated the assassin's sword's sharp thrust. No wonder Xianli was seriously injured back then. Today, if Xiao Xiao hadn't deflected the assassin's sword with his dagger, she wouldn't be so relaxed now. She wasn't afraid of death, but she mustn't die until her revenge was complete. She owed him a favor. Jiang Ruan slowly closed her eyes. To sum it up, today's success was much better than she expected. Chapter 102. To a Turning Point Part 2. Chapter 102. A Turning Point Part 2. After Jiang Xing and the Zhao family received news that Jiang Ruan had been sent to Xi Ning Palace to be treated, they were all momentarily stupefied. Empress Dowager Ida lived high up and usually looked down upon others, and today was the first time she had met Jiang Ruan. Yet now she acted conspicuously different. She even personally allowed her to stay in Xi Ning Palace, which meant that in her heart, Jiang Ruan was not simply just the legitimate daughter of a regular official. Zhugaolinxia refers to one's arrogance due to a high social standing/rank. Jiang Quan and Xia Yin both waited outside. Jiang Susu longed to receive news of Jiang Ruan's death. However, she heard that Empress Dowager Ida had summoned the physician to treat Jiang Ruan. This was a rare honor that one could tell from a glance, thus she could not help but clench both her hands into fists, a streak of hatred flashing through her eyes. Jiang Quan's expression was complicated. Currently, Jiang Ruan had gained merits for coming to the rescue of the Empress Dowager, and this credit would eventually be counted towards the Jiang Fu. Yet it just had to be Jiang Ruan. Recently, Jiang Ruan had showcased extraordinary splendors and buried Jiang Susu's radiance. Deep down, he had never treated Jiang Ruan as his own flesh and blood, and so the more Jiang Ruan shone, the more she hindered Jiang Susu's pathway and the more unsatisfied he was. As of now, Jiang Ruan would definitely be ahead of Jiang Susu by a head. He had wholeheartedly wished to help Jiang Susu lay out a flat path which made Jiang Ruan's actions truly intolerable. Guru refers to kin/kinship. While following various trains of thought, Jiang Quan's face did not reveal any hint of worry, just an unperturbed expression with some disgust. Consequently, he replied to the low-ranking eunuch who had reported the news with, "This official sincerely gives thanks to Empress Dowager's piece of goodwill. However, it is just that my daughter is boorish and is unable to bear this grace. Gong, please report to the Empress Dowager to ask for permission to bring this official's daughter back to the Fu." Gong, term to refer to an eunuch employed by the imperial family with an official position. Upon hearing Jiang Quan's words, pride flashed in Xia Yan's eyes. However, that low-ranking eunuch was astonished. Normally when one's own daughter was injured, a typical father would at least ask about the injury, but this father opened his mouth only to request to bring his daughter back. The low-ranking eunuch was also someone who had become experienced from facing challenges in the palace, so at one glance, he had a clear understanding about the situation. Jiang Quan's eyes only contained distaste, there was no warmth. Thinking of Empress Dowager Ida's special regard towards Jiang Ruan, the low-ranking eunuch raised his whisk and said, "Alas, this servant does not dare to relay these words. Eldest Jiang Miss has an imperial physician to treat her in the palace, and I am afraid that even if you bring her back to the Fu, you will not be able to find such a skilled physician. Furthermore, this servant is here to relay the message. If Jiang Darren has anything further to say, you should personally go to Empress Dowager to tell her." His defiant attitude, deliberate or not, was meant to suppress. The servants in the palace could not be offended, and Jiang Quan was renowned in the palace for being upright and respectable. So when he was mocked, his face immediately flushed, but he was unable to utter any words. The low-ranking eunuch glanced disdainfully at Xia Yan and scoffed at them in his heart. It's really curious how this Jiang couple were able to give birth to such a clear-minded young miss as Jiang Ruan. Jiang Xing couldn't see Jiang Ruan's injury personally, so even though he knew that she was being treated by the imperial physician, he was still anxious. He didn't know why Jiang Ruan had to block the sword for Empress Dowager Ida. He felt reproach in his heart. Even though saying this would mean high treason, he didn't want Jiang Ruan to take a risk even if the emperor's life might be in danger. The low-ranking eunuch was ready to leave after he finished conveying the message. When he walked to the door, he ran into Xiao Xiao and bowed in a hurry. Xiao Xiao waved his hand and took out a small blue porcelain bottle from his bosom and threw it to him. "Yuji ointment," he said briefly. Yuji Gao, referring to whitening cream, lit. Jade skin ointment. Yuji ointment was a good thing that even the concubines in the palace could rarely use. Thus this small bottle was very valuable. It could remove scars on women's bodies. Although Xiao Xiao did not say for whom, the low-ranking eunuch also understood that the recipient should be Jiang Ruan, who was currently resting in the Xianing Palace. Although he doubted the relationship between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan in his heart, he still replied with a smile, "Don't worry, Wang Yi. This servant will surely take it." Xiao Xiao glanced at him faintly, then turned around and walked out of the palace gate. Jiang Ruan slept surprisingly well in the Xianing Palace that night. When she woke up, two beautiful palace maids attentively helped her change her clothes. Jiang Ruan moved her body, but she didn't feel any pain from her chest wound. The palace maid said with a smile, "Miss, you're awake. The wound is not deep. It will be fine as long as it's bandaged well." Then she explained in a low voice. The imperial physician previously said that it would leave a scar. Fortunately, Xiao Wangye sent the Yuji ointment, so there is no need to worry. You won't have any scars. There was envy in her tone. Jiang Ruan looked at her in surprise. Xiao Xiao sent her the Yuji ointment? She pressed the center of her forehead. The favor she owed was becoming bigger and bigger. Since her rebirth, she would reward the other party equally when she took advantage of them. For example, supporting Lu Min was to get a useful ally in the future. Getting Gu Yi's help was also making use of Gu Yi's love of beauty. But Xiao Xiao came to help her many times. Even if it was to repay her kindness of the past, from what he had just given her, he had already paid the favor in full. She had no idea how to reciprocate Xiao Xiao's straightforward help. After thinking about it, she simply put the matter aside. She asked the palace maid, Who else was injured last night? The palace maid reported a long list of names. Zhang Ruan was relieved when she heard that none of her acquaintances was on the list. Then the maid mentioned one incident related to someone she knew. Zhang Dan had panicked and fallen into Zhualangzhong's arms last night. Zhualangzhong was young and promising. Unfortunately, Zhang Dan's clothes were torn during the chaos last night, and Zhualangzhong felt especially soft-hearted when seeing a pretty and delicate girl weeping. Hence, he agreed to take responsibility for her after the event. Langzhong, Doctor Chinese Medicine. The palace maid said, "Your Fu's fourth young miss wedding is perhaps already set." Zhang Ruan raised her eyebrows. With new eyes she reflected on the cowardly and timid fourth younger sister. It was a gamble for her to think up such a scheme during last night's chaos because if she was not careful, she would lose her life. But she dared and Zhang Dan's luck was good. She won the bet, didn't she? Seeing Zhang Ruan in a trance, the palace maid continued, "Deputy General Zhang came to see you. However, he left in a hurry due to some matters. Empress Dowager should be back soon." While Miss was unconscious, the Deputy General and Empress Dowager were very worried. Zhang Ruan thought for a moment. What about my father, mother, and sisters? Empress Dowager ordered them to go back to the Fu first. The palace maid answered. Zhang Ruan lowered her eyes. Empress Dowager asked Zhang Quan to return to the Fu. Did this mean that she already felt some dislike towards Zhang Quan? This was so, it was very good. She smiled faintly and looked at the palace maid apologetically. "I'm a little hungry. The meal is ready. This servant will now serve the food," the palace maid said with a smile. In the imperial study, the emperor suddenly smashed the paperweight on the table to the floor. So, it was the Tianjin's people last night. Guanliang Han and Xiao Xiao tacitly admitted that it was so. Tianjin Kingdom was located in the north of Great Jin, and its territory wasn't vast. Since it was close to the sea, it did very well in transoceanic trade. Furthermore, they currently maintained a non-aggression relationship with Great Jin, though at one time Great Jin had wished to make it an annex. Tianjin's territory was small, but its steel smelting technology was excellent and their soldiers' weapons were much better than those of Great Jin. The late emperor once tried to attack Tianjin, but the latter unexpectedly resisted the troops of 400,000 soldiers of Great Jin and dragged the war out for a whole year. At that point, once the Great Jin's troop supplies were completely exhausted and its people had no way of living due to the heavy taxes, the late emperor finally realized that neither side would win and ordered the troops to withdraw. Since then they had been on guard and didn't act to invade, instead choosing a peaceful coexistence. But then last night, Xiao Xiao and Guanliang Han had interrogated the prisoners for many hours. Although this squad of assassins had been unyielding, their speech revealed that something was amiss. Xiao Xiao ordered the genie guards to check. What he found was that these assassins were from Tianjin. How dare such a tiny land be so presumptuous? The emperor was furious. Last night's assassination attempt was aimed at the emperor. They were unsuccessful, but in the end, they went on a killing spree in the palace, causing panic among officials. By disrupting the imperial court, their behavior actually meant provocation. What was Tianjin's intent? Did they really want to go to war with the Great Jin? Tianjin has been stirring up trouble at the borders over the past few years. It's starting to flex its muscles. Xiao Xiao reminded him. This assassination is probably a signal. A signal of war? Guanliang Han asked. Jin Six is not afraid of them. No emperor could tolerate such a blatant provocation. The dignity of the emperor could not be trampled on, let alone compromise when it came to such the weighty matter of national security. The emperor frowned. General Guan, would you like to lead the troops to march to Tianjin? 6. Zhen. Term used by an emperor to refer to himself. Guanliang Han smiled. It's my pleasure. He did not want to stay here in this annoying capital and face these pedantic people every day. He had defeated the enemy and returned to the capital this year, but he was very unhappy when the emperor told him to remain in this place for his retirement. Soldiers were born for the battlefield, especially those like Guanliang Han. Only on the battlefield could he exert his greatest talents. The emperor thought for a moment. Take your deputy general with you. If he's destined to be a general and returns after a victorious battle, Zhen will reward him heavily. Guanliang Han looked solemn. The emperor's words really gave Zhang Xing room to display his talents. He had thought that since Zhang Xing had contradicted Imperial Consort Chen earlier, the emperor would have been prejudiced against him. Zhang Xing and his sister had just reunited, but Zhang Xing now had another chance to go into battle. If he shone in this military campaign, there would be another young hero in the Great Jin. Then Zhang Xing would truly be able to gain a firm foothold in the imperial court. It's just, would this man with the sister complex be willing to leave Zhang Ruan? The emperor then said, so many assassins infiltrated the palace last night. Were all the imperial guards dead? He looked at Xiao Xiao. Xiao, call out your genie guards. It was time for a complete purge. The Tianjin Kingdom's assassins had entered the imperial palace with ease. This meant that they already had an insider inside the palace. Although they didn't know who the person was, if not uprooted in a day, it would grow like a malignant tumor in the emperor's heart. Xiao Xiao nodded his head slightly. Yes. Guanliang Han sighed in his heart. Another bloodbath was bound to happen in the palace. Once they finished discussing matters with the emperor, they came out of the imperial study only to see a beautiful girl standing outside. She wore a golden muslin skirt, was gorgeously adorned, and her beautiful face was meticulously made up. She had a touch of exotic air. She came over slowly and smiled at Xiao Xiao and said, Xiao Wangyi. It was Princess He. Guanliang Han winked at Xiao Xiao and strode away. Xiao Xiao looked at He with indifference. There was no warmth in his gaze at all. Her heart palpitated at his cold and indifferent eyes and felt a little timid. However, when she thought of what happened last night, resentment emerged in her eyes. She looked up at Xiao Xiao's handsome and cold face, asking, what's the relationship between Xiao Wang and eldest Zhang Miss? This unfathomable question made Xiao Xiao baffled about her intention. With knitted brows he asked her coldly, what does this have to do with Princess? Princess He's eyes reddened and her whole body was chilled by his aloof words. She answered grievously, you know perfectly well that I like you. Princess, please speak cautiously. Xiao Xiao's eyes suddenly turned chilly. I have no other thoughts about Princess. What about Zhang Ruan? Princess He couldn't help but ask harshly. Do you like her? Xiao Xiao's frown went deeper as if he couldn't understand her words. However, there were more pressing matters at the moment, so he just gave Princess He a cold look and turned to leave. Such action was acquiescence in Princess He's eyes. After a brief shock, she suddenly covered her face and burst into tears. After Zhang Ruan had breakfast, Empress Dowager Ida returned to the Xianing Palace. Seeing her like this, she asked, are you feeling better? Zhang Ruan smiled. To answer Empress Dowager, I'm feeling much better. Empress Dowager Ida looked at her from head to toe, and saw that her spirit was much better than yesterday. Feeling relieved, she sat down on the soft couch. Her close mate came with a cup of tea. Empress Dowager Ida took the tea and took a sip, then looked at Zhang Ruan quietly. The girl in front of her was clever and pure. Although she had a charming look, her eyes were clear and without impurities. What was so rare about her was the calm indifference in the face of favors or humiliations. It took frivolity out of her beauty and made her serene and noble. She asked casually, does Zhang Quan not treat you well? Zhang Ruan seemed surprised by this question. She thought for a moment and answered with a smile. Not at all. It's simply because this subject was raised in the country, thus hasn't been very close to father since childhood. She didn't complain incessantly, nor did she lie that Zhang Quan had treated her very well. Instead, she told the truth and used her words to justify Zhang Quan. Her speech was very proper. A faint smile rose on Empress Dowager Ida's lips. Since the relationship is not close, there won't be sadness upon separation. Zhang Ruan was taken aback and looked at Empress Dowager Ida with doubt. Empress Dowager Ida looked at the ruby on top of her nail guard. Zhang family's girl, Aija is going to stay at the Imperial Temple next to the Royal Mausoleum for 3 years. Would you like to join me? Chapter 103. 1 Bidding Farewell, Part 1. Chapter 103 Bidding Farewell. Part 1. Would Zhang Ruan look like this in the future? Zhang Ruan smiled faintly as she focused her attention on Empress Dowager Ida. But her heart was in tumult. By her words, Empress Dowager Ida was implying that Zhang Ruan should leave. Empress Dowager Ida calmly continued, Aijia knows that you are a clever child. After you have thought about it some more, it will become clear that if you accompany Aijia, Aijia will keep you safe and sound. When you return to the palace in 3 years' time, your status will no longer be that of an ordinary person. She looked down at the ruby on her nail guard and said, You have saved Aijia's life. Aijia has considered it carefully, and this conferment is the most suitable way to show Aijia's favor. Zhang Ruan was taken aback. She understood the significance of Empress Dowager Ida's words. She was giving Zhang Ruan an opportunity, an exceptionally good opportunity. However, if she left the Jiangfu at this point, she would be allowing Xia Yan and others of her ilk another 3 years, and this she was exceedingly reluctant to do. Yet, if she really did accompany Empress Dowager Ida to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, her status would naturally be different. Tonight, she was merely the eldest daughter of the Jiangfu, who had saved Empress Dowager Ida's life. Although Empress Dowager showed her grace, being rewarded after the event did not actually amount to much as people would gradually forget what had happened. But, if she accompanied the Empress Dowager for 3 years, everyone would sit up and take notice of her. When they looked at Zhang Ruan, they would subconsciously think of her as the person who was Empress Dowager's companion. Empress Dowager Ida's reward could not be said to be ungenerous. Even though she was wholeheartedly bent on vengeance, she also could not help but be moved. Too many things could happen in 3 years, such as Xia Yan regaining her power and influence. However, if she accompanied Empress Dowager Ida, she could also ensure that Empress Dowager Ida was unable to part from her. To gain something is to lose something else. Zhang Xianji had just entered the court and his foundation was unstable. If he were able to gain the support of the Empress Dowager, she raised her head and looked at Empress Dowager Ida as a smile spread slowly across her face. Many thanks for Empress Dowager's grace. This subject is extremely honored to have this privilege. 3 years. So be it. The most agonizing situation in this world is not that one loses something before one even obtains it. It is clearly to look on helplessly as what one desires is in one's hands but is ruthlessly snatched away by another. The higher one climbs, the harder one falls. She would give those people 3 years to climb to a height from where they could fall to death, and so in 3 years she would lead them to truly horrible deaths. Empress Dowager Ida smiled in satisfaction, and her red lips uttered 2 words, very good. When Guanliang Han informed Zhang Xianji about the emperor's plan, as expected, he saw Zhang Xianji's eyebrows tightly furrow. Guanliang Han was unused to seeing him with this chilly countenance, and patted him on the shoulder. A real man should attack the enemy on the field. With you nagging and fussing so much, aren't you being too craven and cowardly? GGYY. This meaning was originally an onomatopoeia that refers to the annoying screeching noise a chair makes when it is no longer secure. It has also extended to how people can have an opinion on everything, even the noise of creaky tables and chairs. Fussy and naggy. Zhang Xianji replied in anger, I am not being cowardly at all, only. He swallowed whatever words he had left to say back down. Guanliang Han looked at him with understanding. Only you hate to part with that younger sister of yours, right? As siblings, you attach more importance to your sister than any other maidens around you. When all is said and done, what is the meaning of that? Moreover, to speak a word of truth, that sister of yours is not a child that could easily be at a disadvantage. I fear that it is better to hope that no one else is a part of her schemes. Zhang Xianji calmly widened the distance between himself and Guanliang Han before saying, These are Zhang family matters. There's no need to trouble the general to be concerned with them. The moment Zhang Ruan was mentioned, Zhang Xianji became especially prickly. Guanliang Han also became angry and said, Then you can feel awkward about it all by yourself. When the emperor's edict arrives, even if you don't want to go, you'll have to go, unless you want to resist the edict. However, you won't do that for the sake of your little sister. Having said his piece, he stormed off in a huff. Zhang Xianji stood where he was, his thoughts and emotions in a complete mess. Of course, he knew that this was an exceptionally good opportunity. The battlefield was the place where he could fully utilize his martial arts. If he suffered defeat, it would be no more than to give his life fighting for his country. If he was victorious, that would mean enhanced glory and honor. He neither feared death nor sought after glory and wealth, but if he wanted to ensure that Zhongruan would be more securely protected, he could only climb higher, step by step. Magic was sure. To be buried in a horsehide. Figure to give one's life on the battlefield. At the palace banquet, he had seen everything clearly. Even though Zhongruan's intelligence was beyond that of her peers, being in the Jiangfu was seriously too dangerous. Jiang Quan could push her out at any time according to his fancy. The previous evening, were it not for Empress Dowager Ida speaking up, Zhongruan could have been married into the 8th Prince Fu. If he had greater power and authority, he would surely not allow people to influence Zhongruan's future so easily. Thinking of this, he strengthened his resolve to attack the Tianjin kingdom this time. Only, when he thought about Zhongruan being alone in the Jiangfu for 3 years, his heart was gripped with anxiety. His face became a little somber. On leaving the Guanfu, Jiang Xinji planned to return to the Jiangfu and wait for Zhongruan's return, so they could discuss this matter. He had just reached Guanfu's main door when he heard a delicate, timid female voice say, "Zhang Darren." Jiang Xinji was startled. He followed the direction of the sound and saw a delicate and beautiful young lady with 2 maidservants behind her. From her appearance, she must have been a young miss from one of the rich families. He thought she seemed familiar and was momentarily puzzled. When the young lady saw Jiang Xinji staring at her, her cheeks immediately reddened. She hesitated for a while, then took 2 steps forward and said, "Last night Darren saved my life. I would like to personally express my gratitude to Darren." Jiang Xinji frowned slightly as he thought back. Last night he had indeed pulled aside this young lady, but he had rescued so many people and everything had been so chaotic, so he had forgotten about her. The young lady noticed that Jiang Xinji did not seem to remember her, and disappointment briefly showed in her eyes. After a while she smiled and said, "My father is the capital magistrate of the capital city, and he would like to invite Darren to the Fu so he can express his gratitude." Jiang Xinji only smiled slightly. Now that he had entered the imperial court, he could see with his own eyes the steps he could take to rise and expand his influence. How many court officials had become restless? After that short period of observation from the sidelines the previous night, had their intentions started to form? Was this a move to entice him? Although Jiang Xinji was a military leader, he had been born in a family whose members had served as civilian court officials for generations, so he was not completely clueless about how people were recruited to form factions within the imperial court, and he also understood the principle that a wise man should always watch his back. At present, his foundation at court was not stable, and the competition between the princes to be preeminent was intense. He was naturally not so foolish as to involve himself. The slight smile that unconsciously appeared on his face made him look refined and handsome, and Dong Yinger's face felt hot when she saw it. Jiang Xinji said courteously, "It was simply a matter of little effort. Miss does not need to dwell on it. There are still some things that I need to take care of, and so I will take my leave first." Having said this, he did not wait for Dong Yinger's reply, but quickly mounted his horse and left. Dong Yinger was startled, and the words "Ruan Mimi and I are good friends" were stuck in her throat. This was the first time in her life that she had been bowled over by a man's graceful bearing. Last night had been so chaotic, yet she had felt at ease in the arms of this unknown but good-looking young general. When she had asked around and discovered that he was Zhongruan's elder brother, Dong Yinger's happiness knew no bounds. So much so that she had quietly slipped away today, found out that he was at the Guanfu and waited intentionally at the door, just to see him. She had thus abandoned her self-respect as a woman, but Jiang Xinji did not appear to have noticed her in the slightest. Dong Yinger muttered, "Does he hate me? Miss is such a good person, how could Deputy General Jiang hate you?" The maidservant by her side consoled her. "It must be that he really has something urgent to attend to. Miss should not be sad." Dong Yinger watched as the figure of the man on horseback slowly disappeared, disappointment and frustration lingering in her eyes. The news that the Jiang family's eldest daughter, Zhongruan, had saved the Empress Dowager by blocking a sword with her own body on the night of the palace feast circulated widely in the capital that very same night. Everyone knew that afterwards the normally cold and solemn Empress Dowager Ida had personally taken Zhang Ruan back to Xianing Palace and called for the imperial physician to examine and treat her. Everyone knew that the Zhang family's eldest daughter had reaped blessings from this terrible incident. Having rescued the Empress Dowager, she would henceforth always be viewed as the Empress Dowager's benefactor. There were also some who turned their noses up at this, believing that Zhang Ruan had merely gambled her own life to gain a future. However, no matter what was said, it was indisputable that Zhang Ruan had obtained Empress Dowager Ida's favor. Then, the next day, another shocking piece of news circulated. Empress Dowager Ida was about to set off on a journey to pray for blessings at the Imperial Ancestral Temple next to the Royal Mausoleum, and would return to the palace in 3 years. In addition, she had personally issued an imperial decree that she wanted the Zhang family's eldest daughter to accompany her. This was even more astonishing than the previous night's news. An official's daughter Zhang Ruan might be, but even Empress Dowager Ida's own granddaughter had never received such treatment. Everyone said that Zhang Ruan had gained Empress Dowager Ida's special favor, and that this eldest daughter of the Zhang family, who had never been favored before, surely did not know what amazingly good luck had fallen on her. These marvelous events came one after another in quick succession. It was said that, on the second day, the Fugua Great General Zhao Guang, who had significantly assisted the nation, personally visited the imperial court to submit a petition that clearly stated that Zhang Ruan was the Zhao family's own flesh and blood. The Zhao family had originally hardened their hearts and severed ties with Zhao Mei, but now they did not ask for anything else, only that the emperor would grant them a grace, that Zhang Ruan could, in future, decide on her own marriage. Fugua, a title given to a military officer, usually of high rank, who has rendered great assistance to the country. This Fugua great general had devoted his entire life to serving his country and his people, and had never taken the initiative to make any requests. In the presence of both civil and military officials, the emperor could not possibly refuse such a simple entreaty. Thus, he merely waved his hand. Granted. Zhang Ruan's reputation was on fire. When Lian Xiao and Bai Ji came to escort Zhang Ruan back to the Fu, they met many envious gazes on the way. Bai Ji said with concern, "Miss, where are you hurt?" We servants were also worried, but we were not allowed to remain at the palace, and didn't know what was happening. "It's nothing, just a minor injury," Zhang Ruan said, gesturing with her hand. "How are things in the Fu now?" Lian Xiao said, "After we got back that night, Master and Foreign went into the study, and we don't know what they talked about. Second Miss received such a shock, she had to call the doctor to prescribe her medicine for calming the nerves before she could sleep. Second young master was so angry when he heard that eldest young master had been rewarded that he went out to drink." Her voice full of sarcasm, she continued, "and was carried back drunk the next day." Zhang Ruan nodded. "What about fourth younger sister?" "Fourth Miss," Lian Xiao said in a somewhat mysterious tone, "that person from the Zhualangzhong Fu has come a few times, and seems to be a good person. He definitely wants to take responsibility for fourth Miss, and said he would send the marriage gung tai in a few days, but..." Zhang Ruan raised her eyebrows and waited for her to continue speaking. As expected, Lian Xiao said, "When third Miss found out about it, she went off to look for second Yinyang without a word. Second Yinyang then went to look for Master, and later, Master called fourth Miss into his study and spoke with her for a while. When fourth Miss left the study, her face was chalk white. After that, Lu Zhu went to ask around and Miss guess what?" Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "Third younger sister wants to be substituted for fourth younger sister. Li Dai Tao Jiang. Lit. The plum tree withers in place of the peach tree. Figure to substitute one thing for another." "How did Miss know?" Lian Xiao said in amazement. She continued, "That's exactly what happened. It's not certain what second Yinyang said to Master, but Master changed his mind, and although it was supposed to be fourth Miss Gung Tai sent over, now it has been changed to be third Miss Gung Tai. Will Zhualangzhong agree to this?" Zhang Ruan leaned back against the soft padding of the horse carriage, unhurriedly drinking her tea. Zhualangzhong does not know about this situation. From the sound of what second Yinyang intended, Once the marriage has taken place and the ancestors have been paid respects to, there's nothing Zhualangzhong can do. At that time, Master will personally talk to Zhualangzhong, and the matter will probably be dropped. Baiji also exclaimed, "Fourth miss is really too pitiful." On the contrary, Zhang Ruan did not consider Zhang Dan as one to be pitied. The previous night, since Zhang Dan had already had a scheme in mind involving Zhualangzhong, she must have planned her scheme much earlier. Both were born of concubines, but Zhang Li was not resigned to the fact that Zhang Dan would be married off so well. Furthermore, between Zhang Li and Zhang Dan, Zhang Quan was definitely more biased towards Zhang Li. To that end, while it was unknown what Second Yinyang and Zhang Quan had discussed, the result must have involved some sort of benefits for Zhang Quan. Lian Xiao also commented, with how third miss has snatched up fourth miss marriage in this way, although it seems insincere, the Zhualangzhong family is extremely good. Therefore, in the future she will definitely live much better than fourth Mississippi. Even though fourth miss has been pacified by Master, I am afraid that she still feels disgusted. Jiang Ruan shook her head. Wrong. In the end, Jiang Li may not live better than Jiang Dan. Baiji puzzled. Why do you say so, miss? Wait and see. In a few years' time one will understand. Who was Jiang Dan? Jiang Dan wasn't someone who would swallow it silently after being wronged. If Zhang Quan thought that Jiang Dan was within his grasp to manipulate, then he was indeed gravely mistaken. It cannot be denied that Jiang Li had already buried a shadow of hatred in Jiang Dan's heart. Thus, she had become like a poisonous snake hibernating in the dark, just waiting for an opportunity to strike out with her poisonous venom to kill all of her foes, without any reservations and showing no mercy. One feared that ahead of her, Jiang Li would be suffering many trials and tribulations. Chapter 103. 2 Bidding Farewell, Part 2. Chapter 103 Bidding Farewell, Part 2. The carriage rumbled down the road when it suddenly came to a stop. Startled, Lian Xiao reacted by lifting the carriage curtain. What's happening? Zhang Ruan tilted her head and caught a glimpse of the corner of a black-colored jacket through the narrow slit of the curtain. A fleeting thought crossed her mind, and she instructed the driver, "Have the coachman withdraw for now." The place where they had stopped just happened to be a small alleyway, and there was nary a trace of anyone within the vicinity. Baiji was somewhat concerned, but Zhang Ruan had already started to disembark from the carriage. Sure enough, upon stepping down, she saw before her a lonely and graceful person dressed completely in black with his back to her, and yet the dark alleyway somehow seemed to light up because of him. She instructed Baiji and Lian Xiao to remain in the carriage while she went up to Xiao Xiao. When she was right before him, she uttered, "Xiao Wangye." Xiao Xiao lowered his head to look at her and after a thought, asked, "Are you really going with the Empress Dowager to the Imperial Ancestral Temple?" Zhang Ruan nodded, "Yes. It is my good fortune to be able to accompany the Empress Dowager." Pausing, she looked at Xiao Xiao. "Many thanks to Xiao Wangye for rescuing me that day at the palace feast. Since you contrived to be injured, I could only control the sword chi so that it injured you to a lesser degree. In the end you still had to bear an injury. My apologies," Xiao Xiao said solemnly. Zhang Ruan was startled. He actually perceived that she had made a calculated move to meet the sword thrust. Immediately, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. However, she still smiled and said, "Ruanyang and Xiao Wangye are different. When I want something, I will take it upon myself to do all that is necessary to achieve my goal. If I had not blocked the sword, then I would have had no way to gain what I wanted." "And did you gain what you wanted to?" Xiao Xiao asked. Zhang Ruan looked into the distance and replied, "Soon." Xiao Xiao's beautiful eyes flashed with emotion. He pursed his lips, retrieved an object from within his robes and placed it in Zhang Ruan's hand. That object was an exquisite and compact dagger. Embedded on its head was an emerald opal. With one look, one could tell it was an extraordinary item. Zhang Ruan had also seen it before, as this was the exact same dagger that never left Xiao Xiao's side. Stunned, she asked, "Xiao Wangye, this is?" "Whilst in the Imperial Ancestral Temple, one may not be absolutely safe," Xiao Xiao faintly replied. "It can be of some help to you." He continued, "I need to take another trip to the Miaojiang, and will be leaving on the day of your departure, so I will not be there to say goodbye to you." "Miaojiang?" Hmong or Miao ethnic group of southwest China. Miaozhong refers to Miao border. Zhang Ruan felt astonished. This person was quite strange. Why would he specifically mention his journey to her? The dagger that was left in her hand felt like something heavy that was pressed against her heart. Zhang Ruan shook her head. This is something that is of extraordinary significance to Xiao Wangya. Forgive me, I am unable to accept it. A congratulatory gift for your birthday, Xiao Xiao replied. And Zhang Ruan was stunned once more. Xiao Xiao explained, this dagger is your birthday gift. After saying this, he continued, there is no reason to take back what I have already given. With that, he then stared at that dagger intensely with a look that said he vowed to never take it back. In her heart, she could not help but break into laughter. Usually, Xiao Xiao had an appearance of always being cold and cheerless, thus when would he ever show such childishness like he did at this moment? It was truly something astounding. With this sort of person, she found that her cheeks had somehow begun to burn under the fixed gaze of that pair of starry eyes. But then she came to her senses, and cursed herself under her own breath. She was too young. In the eyes of Xiao Xiao, she would not even be considered to be a young woman yet. What did she have to be embarrassed about? Many thanks, Xiao Wangye, she calmly replied. Xiao Xiao's gaze landed on Zhang Ruan's wrist and he suddenly said, it suits you very well. The blood moon bracelet that Zhang Ruan wore on her arm was emitting a faint blue glow. Having been seen in one glance by Xiao Xiao, Zhang Ruan immediately lowered her hands down as if stung by a bee, her long sleeves covering up her wrists. She felt vexed. Why was he so strange today? It could be assumed that because they were both leaving the capital, this ally had stepped in for assistance once more. But precisely because he had done so, it was somewhat vexing. After she exchanged a few more words with Xiao Xiao, she quickly returned to the carriage. It then steadily moved with rumbling sounds towards the outer alley. The youth clad in black stood unwaveringly in that alley, like a pine tree exuding an extraordinary elegance that was natural, graceful, and unforced. He faintly watched as the carriage traveled further away, and only then did he turn around and leave. Xiugu Qingsong. This was actually part of a poem by Xian Qiji, one of the great poets along with Su Shi and Li Qingzhao from the Southern Song period. The phrase refers to the out-of-the-ordinary, elegant manners and like the evergreen pine tree, a firm, unswerving and steadfast ideal of integrity. Inside the carriage, Zhang Ruan was lost in thought. What was she like 3 years from now in her last life? Meanwhile, in the Jiangfu, chaos reigned. Fantian Futy. Sky and the earth turning upside down. Figure complete confusion / everything turned on its head. Xia Yan only had to think about Zhang Ruan accompanying Empress Dowager Ida to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, and she felt as though someone was twisting a knife in her heart. How did something like this drop into the lap of a bitch like Zhang Ruan? Jiang Susu had been pale and wan over the past few days, and the words that Xianli had spoken on the night of the palace feast stabbed at her heart. She could not accept the fact that, unexpectedly, the person in the heart of such a vigorous and handsome young man was Zhang Ruan. Consequently, upon hearing the news that Zhang Ruan was going to leave, she laughed bitterly and said, all right, it's good that you are leaving, and it would be best if you die at the Imperial Ancestral Temple. She looked at Xia Yan and said, Mother, I want to go to the family ancestral temple. Have you become muddle-headed? Xia Yan said in shock. Go to the family ancestral temple? Do you not know that going to the family ancestral temple will ruin your life? Jiang Susu was not as emotional as she usually was. With a calm expression on her pale face, she replied, Mother, I have thought it through already. I want to go to the family ancestral temple. I have already asked Father, and he has agreed. Suer, what happened? Xia Yan said in a panic. She could not help but feel uneasy with Jiang Susu acting in this way. Nothing has happened, Jiang Susu said as she turned her head away, as if unwilling to speak any further. I am simply weary of life in the Fu. It will be good to go to the family ancestral temple and experience peace of mind. Isn't Zhang Ruan going to the Imperial Ancestral Temple as well? Why can't I do the same? Isn't it just a matter of obtaining a good reputation? Hasn't she come thus far merely by relying on this? After 3 years I can do the same. Xia Yan wanted to persuade her further, but Jiang Susu had already stated, Mother need not say more. I have already made up my mind and will leave in a few days. Naturally, there was more than one person in the Jiangfu who was green with envy that Jiang Ruan was accompanying the Empress Dowager. There was no need to talk about Jiang Li. Although she had received the marriage arrangement from Zhuolangzhong, when she recalled that Jiang Ruan had been able to insinuate herself into the imperial family, her envy knew no bounds. In Jiang Dan's courtyard, Jiang Dan lay on her bed, listless and sickly. A maidservant said through her tears, "Miss, although much has happened, please eat a little something. If you continue like this, you will collapse." "I'm just not reconciled to this," Jiang Dan said hoarsely. "I hurried to secure my future, but had to exchange it for this ending. Jiang Li snatched away my marriage arrangement. Jiang Susu is shielded by father, and even Jiang Ruan. I had thought her situation was not much better than mine, and now even she is basking in unending adulation. But what have I gained?" Her eyes darkened momentarily as she continued softly, "I'm not reconciled to this at all. There will come a day when I will live a life better than all of them, and all of them will have to look up to me." It seemed that the happiest person in the Jiangfu was old Jiang Madam. After all, Jiang Ruan's surname was Jiang, which indicated to all that she was a member of the Jiang family, and no matter what other people thought, when outsiders spoke of Jiang Ruan, they would know that she was a young lady from the Jiangfu. The favor of the emperor towards Jiang Ruan was the favor of the emperor towards the Jiangfu. When she thought about this, she increasingly felt that Jiang Ruan and her older brother were more pleasing to her eyes. At this time, Jiang Xing was talking to Jiang Ruan in Ruanju. Jiang Ruan had already received the news that he would be going into battle against the Tianjin kingdom. In her previous life, the battle between the Tianjin kingdom and the Great Jin dynasty lasted no less than 5 years. But Jiang Xing was already gone by that time. Now that this event was to reoccur in this lifetime, she naturally knew that the Great Jin would eventually emerge victorious from this military campaign, but it would be a tragic victory. The Tianjin kingdom had an extremely formidable military advisor, and following the advice of this cunning and treacherous weapon, even though the Great Jin had the advantage of numbers, they very narrowly escaped defeat. In truth, Jiang Xing had already made his decision, but was uneasy about Jiang Ruan. Fortunately, as soon as he returned to the Fu, he heard the news about Empress Dowager Ida wanting to take Jiang Ruan with her. He felt as if a huge boulder had been lifted off his heart. It was far safer for Jiang Ruan to accompany Empress Dowager Ida than to stay in the Jiangfu. However, he was still somewhat suspicious and said, "I have no idea why the Empress Dowager wants you to go with her, but being close to those in authority can be as perilous as being close to a tiger. The Empress Dowager is no exception. Ruan, you have to use your discretion and play it by ear. You must never allow yourself to come to grief." Jiang Ruan smiled as she said, "Dage does not need to be anxious for me, I have my own plans." She knew that Jiang Xing was going into battle because of her. If not for his intention to protect her even more carefully, why would Jiang Xing involve himself in such a cruel and bloody activity? She thought of the cultured and refined young master from a civilian court official's family in her previous life, and how the hands which had only previously held a writing brush, now wielded a sword. Even his pristine white robe had also been exchanged for battle armor. She said, "Thank you, Dage." Jiang Xing patted her head, and did not say anything. On the day that the Empress Dowager left the capital, there were 36 cushioned sedan chairs, 900 elite imperial bodyguards, and 85 carriages carrying damask silk and jade. As it moved, the procession was a majestic, imposing sight. The emperor stood atop the palace wall and watched the procession recede into the distance. Jiang Xing's eyes still reflected his reluctance. Jiang Ruan had stealthily thrust the papers in her hand into Jiang Xing's robes. Jiang Xing was stunned, but Jiang Ruan smiled slightly and whispered, "One of the letters is for Dage, and the other is for the capital's great master Huiju. Dage, take care of yourself." Those letters were the work of an entire night, where she had written from memory. In her previous life while in the palace, she had heard of the battle between the Tianjin kingdom and the Great Jin dynasty. Several of the engagements between the two forces had been especially thrilling, and had been described in great detail by people in the palace. She ransacked her mind for information and wrote all that she could remember of those battles on the paper, which she then gave to Zhang Xing. She didn't care if Zhang Xing would be skeptical of her. She only wanted to ensure Zhang Xing's safety. At present, she simply wished that she could remember the details more clearly, and was vexed that she had not listened more attentively in her previous life. If she had, then Zhang Xing's chances of survival would increase. As for Great Master Huiju's letter, it covered the period of the 3 years that she would be absent from the capital. There were several matters which she had to ensure carried on as they had been done in her previous life. Zhang Xing smiled. He said, "Arwan, take care of yourself," before turning and leaving. Lu Zhu lifted the curtain of the horse carriage and looked out, saying, "Everything is really quite impressive. It's just sad that Miss has only recently returned to the capital and now has to leave not so long after." "I'm not sad," Zhang Ruan said as she produced a small smile. As she looked out, she still seemed to be able to see the corner of Zhang Xing's robe flying in the wind. But then she turned around again to face the unknown. Ahead of her were 3 years that were unfamiliar to her and had never happened. This young general was about to step onto the battlefield, fight hand to hand, and gain what was uniquely his, an unparalleled arrogance and honor. "Dage, we are now parting. I hope that the two of us will be fated to meet again in 3 years' time, each standing ahead above others, noble amongst nobles." The two turned around, and neither of them looked back. Many years later, when the great Jin dynasty had become prosperous and beautiful, like a picturesque painting of the Jiangshan River, this scene would be enthusiastically discussed by many people. The farewell at the city gate of this legendary brother and sister pair would become the starting point of their true glory in this lifetime. The horses neighed as their hooves clipped along. The rising sun burst forth in all its splendor, painting half the sky of the great Jin red. The brilliance of the rose-tinted clouds reflected the high morale of the elite troops, and as the resplendent imperial carriage set off, nature in all its splendor and warmth gently watched as the procession moved into the distance. End of Volume 1. Chapter 105. A Startling Change, Part 1. Chapter 105. A Startling Change, Part 1. Jiang Susu is back. A plain carriage came to a slow stop at the gate of the Jiangfu. Xia Yan, who went out to greet the guest, trembled when she saw 2 maidservants supporting a beautiful girl stepping out of the carriage. The girl was none other than Jiang Susu. She was obviously taller than she had been 3 years ago. Perhaps due to her long stay in the family ancestral temple, her temperament seemed calm and her past arrogance had gone completely, leaving only a faint sense of aloofness. There was a smile on her lips and the scar on her face had disappeared without a trace. Her facial features were vivid and beautiful. Furthermore, it was intriguing to see that even though her appearance was beautiful and virtuous, she also seemed to have a newfound seductive charm. Anyone who closely followed her every move would become a little distracted. When Xia Yan first saw her face, her heart was filled with joy. Then, while awkwardly holding her waist, she leaned forward and looked at Jiang Susu's face again. "Suer, how did your face heal?" The physician who had visited the Fu at that time had said that the scars on Jiang Susu's face might never heal completely, though if he were to find some rare and precious medicinal ingredients in the future, the scars might lessen. But at present, Jiang Susu's skin was like a perfectly peeled boiled egg with no trace of disfigurement. Jiang Susu looked at her and chuckled softly. It healed on its own. Her glance at Xia Yan was so soft that Xia Yan unexpectedly felt a flutter in her heart. For some reason, the Jiang Susu in front of her was so unfamiliar, as if she were a different person. But on closer inspection she was also still the same. She held back her suspicion and said, "Suer, it's great that you're back. You're so heartless, unwilling to see your mother for the past 3 years." Jiang Susu pretended not to hear her. Her gaze went past Xia Yan and fell on a soft sedan chair that had appeared in front of the Fu's gate. It was a mahogany-colored soft sedan chair carried by 4 imperial guards in uniforms. Even though the sedan chair was exquisite and gorgeous, nothing was revealed about the status of the person inside. There had been many onlookers watching the excitement along the way, eager to see which Fu the nobility was from. The sedan chair stopped at the gate of the Jiangfu. Jiang Susu stared at the sedan chair without saying a word. Two maidservants in beautiful dresses came out from the back of the sedan. They opened its beaded curtain with a smile and welcomed the person inside to come out. An incomparably beautiful girl in a red dress stepped out with mesmerizing elegance. She moved at an unhurried pace, and with each step she took, Xia Yan dug her fingers deeper into her palm. Finally, the girl in red stood in front of Xia Yan. She spoke with a smile. Ruan Yongrit's mother, second sister. It's been a while. Xia Yan felt the suffocation in her chest rush to her face. The news of Zhang Ruan's grand spectacle in the palace had already spread throughout the capital. As Xia Yan thought of this, she itched to tear Zhang Ruan to shreds. Why did such good luck not fall on Jiang Susu? And now, when Jiang Susu had finally returned to the Fu, Zhang Ruan picked the exact same time to appear as well. The contrast between the two was evident and the people outside could see it clearly, so perhaps by tomorrow more rumors would be spread throughout the capital. After all, people always flattered their superiors and trampled those inferior to them. In the same way, both of them had entered the ancestral temples at the same time. But now Zhang Ruan returned in glory whereas Jiang Susu arrived in a humble carriage. Xia Yan's heart was about to burst with rage. Zhang Ruan clearly did this on purpose. On the day of Zhang Ruan's return, after calling Zhang Ruan to come over and chat briefly, old Zhang Madam was left exhausted. Xia Yan's pregnancy had already passed the first trimester. Naturally, there would be no problem if she raised it carefully. However, in her previous life, the child in Xia Yan's belly wasn't born because Xia Yan suffered a miscarriage a month later. At that time, it was found out that the miscarriage was due to the actions of fifth Yang, Hong Ying. Subsequently, Jiang Quan was furious and locked Hong Ying up in the woodshed. Later, it was discovered that Hong Ying had found a rope to hang herself and died there. But looking back on it now, there seemed to be many questionable points. Although it was very likely for Hong Ying to have carried out this despicable act against Xia Yan, hanging herself didn't seem to fit her temperament. If this world followed the traces of the past life, Xia Yan's unborn child couldn't be saved. It's just that Hong Ying Zhang Ruan was very curious. Was that scheme actually carried out by Hong Ying? While she was deep in thought, Lian Xiao opened the curtain and announced, "Miss Fifth Yang is here." Zhang Ruan raised her eyebrows. Hong Ying moved very fast. She gave the order to send Hong Ying in. Hong Ying was more exquisitely dressed than she was 3 years ago. Even though she still didn't look magnificent or opulent, everything from her clothing to her jewelry was good. It seemed that Jiang Quan had treated her well during this time. It was like this. When she had just returned to the Jiangfu in her previous lifetime, at exactly this time, Hong Ying had started competing with Xia Yan. And now that Xia Yan was pregnant, it was much easier for Hong Ying to attend to Jiang Quan. Hong Ying warily sat down opposite Zhang Ruan. She had had a very comfortable and contented life over the last few years. The many things that Xia Yan had previously done had caused a knot in Jiang Quan's heart, and since the two were not very close, she had taken the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Jiang Quan had begun to pay more and more attention to her, but unexpectedly Xia Yan had gotten pregnant at this crucial time. Fortunately, Zhang Ruan was back. Hong Ying had always felt a kind of inexplicable awe of Zhang Ruan. After witnessing all the different kinds of terrible means instigated by this seemingly gentle eldest young miss 3 years ago, she had the intention to draw Zhang Ruan to her side. This time her insight had been proven right. Zhang Ruan had obtained Empress Dowager Yida's favor. Zhang Xinji had risen steadily and was highly valued by Zhao Guang. And now Zhang Ruan had become a Junju. Thus, if she followed Zhang Ruan's methods, wouldn't the Fu end up under her, Hong Ying, rule? When she thought of this, Hong Ying spoke humbly with a deferential expression. This concubine greets the Junju. Fifth Yang, there's no need to be overly courteous. Zhang Ruan held the teapot in front of her. Fifth Yang and I are all one family. There is no need to be polite. With a smile, she looked at the woman in front of her. After 3 years of absence, I can see that Fifth Yang has lived well. It's all thanks to eldest Miss blessing. Hong Ying smiled. Eldest Miss is the blessed one. Zhang Ruan smiled and exchanged greetings with her. After a while, sure enough, Hong Ying ventured to ask her, "Does eldest Miss know that Foreign is pregnant? Father is having a child in his old age." Who doesn't know about it in the Fu? Ruan Yang is neither deaf nor blind. Hearing the faint ridicule in Zhang Ruan's tone, the corners of Hong Ying's eyes suddenly twitched. However, the play still had to go on. With a worried look on her face, she said, "What I'm about to say may seem ridiculous to eldest Mississippi. It is just to say what this concubine is worried about." "Oh, what does Fifth Yin Yang worry about?" Zhang Ruan asked with a smile. This concubine thinks of eldest Miss as her confidant. So this concubine emboldened herself to speak to eldest Mississippi. It's great that Foreign is pregnant, but in recent years, due to matters related to Master, Foreign has had many misunderstandings with this concubine. And if she gives birth to a little young Master, perhaps she will lose her temper even more at this concubine. Hong Ying looked anxious as if she were really nervous. "Oh, what Fifth Yin Yang said is too serious." Zhang Ruan smiled and comforted her. "Mother is kind-hearted. How can she be angry at Fifth Yin Yang? Besides, my father wouldn't let it go. If Fifth Yin Yang is wronged, father would be the first to refuse to let go of this matter." Hong Ying took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes, blotting her fake tears away. With a wry smile, she said, "It is my good fortune that Master treats me well, but it has always been dangerous for women to give birth. It might be unpleasant to hear, but if something goes wrong with Foreign, the blame will surely fall on me. This concubine's bitter grievances perhaps can't be absolved. I have been alone all my life in this Fu. If I am really charged with that, perhaps I will be left for dead even without an intact corpse." Zhang Ruan looked at Hong Ying calmly. There was some truth in Hong Ying's words, and it was obvious that she was smart and had anticipated this outcome. However, since she already thought of this, how had she been caught in Xia Yan's net in the previous lifetime? Zhang Ruan didn't believe that Xia Yan's miscarriage in the past life was caused by Hong Ying. In fact, Hong Ying was a very smart woman who was adept at judging the situation. She wouldn't do anything that was risky and uncertain. In that case, the miscarriage was just a crime forced on Hong Ying by Xia Yan. So how did Xia Yan lose her child in the previous life? Chapter 105. To a Startling Change, Part 2. Chapter 105. A Startling Change, Part 2. In spite of this thought, Zhang Ruan smiled at Hong Ying. What Fifth Yin Yang just said is really terrifying. There are so many people in the Fu protecting Foreign's baby, so Fifth Yin Yang has nothing to be afraid of. Ruan Yang thinks that Fifth Yin Yang's top priority should not be to delve deeply into the child in Foreign's belly, but to have her own child. She, an unmarried girl, openly discussed the matter of having children with the Fu Xinyang. There was not a bit of shyness on her face at all, as if this was a natural thing. Although Hong Ying was shocked in her heart, she answered with a blush on her face, "Eldest Miss, it's not that this concubine doesn't want to have a baby, but a girl born in the brothel had to take a drug from an early age, which could not only make a woman's body fair and smooth, but also make her body give off a peculiar fragrance. Naturally, it was a means for girls to win over benefactors. However, there was also a side effect to such a drug: infertility. When Hong Ying first entered the Fu, she truly only wanted to gain Jiang Quan's favor and be liked by him. Eventually, she succeeded. But the longer she stayed in the house, the stronger her desire to have a child grew. Men's favor might not last long, but if there was a child, a son, her status would be promoted by leaps and bounds. She didn't try to overthrow Xia Yan because Xia Yan was backed by the Xia Fu, but she would have been satisfied if Jiang Quan were to consider both her and Xia Yan as equals. Every time Jiang Quan took a rest in her courtyard, Xia Yan would send Li Momo with soup to avoid pregnancy, and she ensured that she finished drinking it. Then, every time after Li Momo departed, she made herself choke and forced herself to spit out all of the soup. Even so, she had secretly asked a physician about the drug she had taken in the brothel when she was young, and he told her that her chances of conceiving were very slim. Her inability to conceive a child was a thorn in her heart. Meanwhile, Xia Yan was now pregnant. After all her painstaking efforts to gain everything in front of her, would everything return to as it was before? She was unwilling. But what could she do? She never got pregnant. Zhang Ruan took a sip of tea leisurely and asked her indifferently, "Why can't you be pregnant? There is no woman in the world who cannot conceive children." Honging was stunned. She raised her head to look at Zhang Ruan. "Eldest miss, what do you mean by this?" Zhang Ruan looked at her with pity. "What to do? 15 Yang Ruanyang also sympathizes with you. But to live safely in the Fu, you must first have a child. Do you understand? If you want children, you will have children." Honging took a moment to digest the meaning of Zhang Ruan's words. She was so shocked and looked at Zhang Ruan as if she didn't know this young woman at all. "Eldest miss." Jiang Quan gave her a slight smile. "It's 15 Yang's life. Ruanyang has no right to interfere." Hongying's heart was suddenly in chaos. Zhang Ruan's subtle words unexpectedly revealed a solution. Graft the flower of one tree onto another. Yuajimu. Lit. To graft flowers onto a tree / to surreptitiously substitute one thing for another. If this matter succeeded, she would ascend to a higher position in the Fu. That being so, it was also very risky, and if discovered, it would be for the great crime of muddying the clan's lineage, and punishable by being bludgeoned to death. She was shocked to hear Zhang Ruan's calm manner in making this suggestion and felt incredulous. As a daughter of the Fu, how could Zhang Ruan propose to use other people's blood to inherit a position in the Zhang Fu? Had she ever regarded herself as Zhang's family? Honging was restless and couldn't think of anything else for a moment. Zhang Ruan's words, although frightening, held an inexplicable temptation to her. But she couldn't make up her mind and thus replied hurriedly, "Eldest miss words, this concubine has listened. I just remembered that there are still things to do, so I won't bother you anymore." Zhang Ruan didn't urge her to stay either. With a smile she said, 15 Yang, please think it over. Don't rush. But also, don't wait until mother suffers an accident." When Honging heard this, her heart palpitated once again and she didn't stay any longer. She left hurriedly with her maidservant. Lian Xiao saw her flee in a panic, then pushed the door open and came inside. "Why is 15 Yang so frightened?" Bai Ji stood silently. Lian Xiao touched her nose. She must have been intimidated by Miss Charm. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Lu Zhu then pushed the door and came in also. With excitement and fear on her face, she turned and locked the door tightly. Then she closed the window, pulled up the curtain and walked over to Zhang Ruan. Lu Zhu bent down and whispered, "Miss, you asked this servant to investigate Su Exanyuan. I've discovered something." Zhang Ruan looked at her. "There must be something wrong. What did you discover?" "There's nothing wrong," Lu Zhu smiled mysteriously. "This servant just listened to what was said in the kitchen. Second miss led an ascetic life in the ancestral temple, thus her body was weak. But since her return, her maidservants who die in Qingting have asked the kitchen to prepare hens and they personally stew chicken soup every day to supplement second miss health." "What's so strange about that?" Lian Xiao asked. Lu Zhu shook her head. "I remember that second miss hates chicken soup the most. What's more, second miss practiced Buddhism in the ancestral temple. If she lived such an ascetic life as they said, she was naturally very devout. But if she was so pious, how can she kill living beings and eat their meat as soon as she returned to the Fu? Isn't that? It's violating Buddhist precepts." Zhang Ruan couldn't help laughing and looked at Lu Zhu with admiration. Lu Zhu's observation skills had become much stronger now. The fact that she could think of all of this, it was really remarkable. When Lu Zhu saw Zhang Ruan's expression, she was also very proud. She said, "This servant thought it strange, so I paid more attention to this point. Sure enough, there is indeed more. Can you all take a guess?" Lu Zhu really treated this place as a storytelling tea shop. Lian Xiao couldn't wait and asked urgently, "What's going on?" Who Dai and Qingting said they were making chicken soup. But there was nothing else prepared except for the chicken. When making soups to supplement health, Donkey, Angelica sinensis, as well as red dates should be put in. "Is it possible to use a whole chicken?" Lu Zhu explained. "I gave the sweeping maid at Su Exan Yuan 2 silver so that I could go in and search. I was accompanied by Xiao Huang, the gatekeeper. He has a sensitive nose." Unexpectedly, a chicken carcass was dug out from under the clump of roses in Su Exan Yuan. All of its blood had been bled dry and its feathers were torn apart. Lu Zhu still felt a lingering fear. The wound was hideous. "I was so scared looking at it. After reburying the carcass in a hurry, I rushed back. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji were silent. They both looked solemn. After a while Lian Xiao asked, Miss, is second Miss possessed by demons? Otherwise, why did she perform such witchcraft? Miss Second Miss is so scary now. How about staying in the palace for a while? Anyway, Second Miss won't dare to pass in front of the Empress Dowager. Bai Ji also reminded her. Zhang Ruan looked at Lu Zhu. When you saw that chicken carcass, was there a cut wound from the knife where the blood was? No. Lu Zhu frowned. This servant was quite mischievous when she was little. Once the next-door aunt's barred rock chicken pecked me, and so I chased and bit it back. I saw clearly that it was not a knife wound, nor did it look like an animal bite, but rather a human bite. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao gasped. Zhang Ruan's head bowed in deep thought. Since she met Jiang Susu at the Jiangfu's gate a few days ago, Zhang Ruan felt there was something abnormal about Jiang Susu. Although she couldn't say it specifically, Jiang Susu was not only like a different person, she also perceived something weird about Jiang Susu's body. The past few days Jiang Susu never left Su Xian Yuan and even rarely went to see Xia Yan. It was unusual for her to stay in the courtyard all day, and not knowing what she did there. Therefore, Zhang Ruan ordered Lu Zhu to investigate, but she didn't expect to discover such a result. It was really bizarre. This servant also thought that Second Miss was very odd. Lu Zhu said. That day, I clearly saw that there were no scars on Second Miss' face. Her wounds were so severe before, but I don't see traces of them at all now. How is this possible if she isn't a demoness? There are no demons in this world, Zhang Ruan said faintly. And even if there were, she was determined to not be afraid. She herself had died once. If this fact was known by others, they would view her as such as well. It was just that Jiang Susu was so abnormal that she felt unsettled. This forced her to be vigilant. At the moment she couldn't do anything about it. So she thought for a moment and suddenly said, Lu Zhu, prepare a carriage for me. I'm going out right away. Where are you going, miss? Bai Ji asked curiously. To Dongfeng Lu. In the imperial study. As he stared at the book in front of him, the emperor wore a deep frown that showed he had encountered a thorny problem. After a while he asked, based on what you just said, the people of South Xinjiang have already planted their spy within the palace. The young man, dressed in black, standing before him answered faintly, yes. Zhen has been negligent these past few years. The emperor suppressed his extreme anger. Before Zhen can get even with them, they have already targeted Zhen first. It's simply too reckless. Not only that, Xiao Xiao said, the sudden dispatch of troops from the Tianjin kingdom has a lot to do with them. Those barbarians in South Xinjiang are cruel and cunning. Their methods are ruthless. I really didn't expect them to have such a scheme. If the Tianjin kingdom is disturbed, they must perceive some benefit in it. Xiao, stay in the capital and investigate the matter of this planted spy. Even if Zhen has to overturn the whole capital, Zhen will find that person. Xiao Xiao nodded. The emperor looked at him and suddenly sighed. You've narrowly escaped death in Miaozhong for 3 years. I know your thoughts. But now you see, there was sorrow between the emperor's eyebrows. All the people in the palace wish for Zhen to die early. Zhen understands the thoughts of Old Eighth and Old Fifth more than they realize. The crown prince also has the same virtue. Zhen can protect his life for a while but not for his lifetime. As for the civil and military officials in the court, they are just crooks in my eyes. Do you really think Zhen doesn't know their thoughts? Xiao. Your Majesty, Xiao Xiao interrupted. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. If anyone happened to see it, they would be surprised by the relationship between the emperor and Jining Wang. After a pause, the emperor waved his hand feebly. That's all, you can leave. Xiao Xiao walked to the door and heard the emperor's voice from behind. You are now at a marriageable age. If you are interested in any family's daughter, tell me, I will grant you the marriage. The man in black didn't stop. He departed from the imperial study without hesitation. Only the emperor's sigh remained. Although Dongfeng Lu was the largest treasure shop in the capital, not many people went there. It was because the dazzling array of jewels inside were priced exorbitantly and each of them was a rare treasure. If not for the wealthy high officials and the nobility, no one could purchase the things there. Today, however, a carriage was parked at the gate of Dongfeng Lu. The people passing by cast curious looks. They wanted to see which family's young master or miss it was. But when they saw a remarkably beautiful girl in a red dress alighting from the carriage, everyone immediately knew. This was the capital's current great personage, Hongen Junju. Not to mention her beauty, Hongen Junju also received Empress Dowager Ida's favor. Her rewards were countless. Of course she could visit Dongfeng Lu. Zishukir. Lit. Burn your hand. Feel the heat/figure arrogance of the powerful/a mighty figure no one dares approach. After admiring her for a while, they saw that the young girl in red went into the building with 2 maidservants. When Jiang Ruan entered, a beautiful attendant came over. "Miss, would you like to see jewelry?" Jiang Ruan glanced at her. "I want to see Yi Feng." The attendant was startled and shook her head. "Miss, have you come to the wrong place?" Jiang Ruan smiled before she stretched out her hand, took out something from her sleeve and waved it in front of the attendant. "Is it all right now?" When the attendant saw clearly what was in Jiang Ruan's hand, she suddenly changed her look and respectfully said, "Miss, please follow this servant." Jiang Ruan put the dagger given by Xiao Xiao back into her sleeve. Inwardly she said, "This thing is really useful." They went to the weapons shop on the 2nd floor. Then the attendant pressed the Celadon lion's head on the wall, and a small door opened to reveal an elegant room next to it. The attendant saluted her with both hands clasped on her left waist and both legs bent. "Miss, please come in. Boss Yi is inside." A woman's salute, hands and fingers interlocked and placed on the left waist while bending the legs. When Jiang Ruan stepped inside, she heard an impatient voice speaking. "With so many things going on all day, is Master really going to put me under house arrest for a lifetime? Can't I just apologize to eldest Jiang, miss?" Jiang Ruan stopped walking and asked with a smile, "What's the apology for?" Yi Feng looked back impatiently. "Of course for the treasure." The remaining half-sentence was swallowed in his mouth. His mouth opened wide with surprise. Jiang, eldest Jiang, miss." Jiang Ruan sat down on the chair opposite him. "I have an urgent matter. I want to see your master." Chapter 106 A Night Visit to the Jiang Fu. Chapter 106 A Night Visit to the Jiang Fu. As soon as Xiao Xiao returned to Dongfeng Lu, a maidservant on the lower floor informed him that someone was waiting for him in his private room. When he reached the hidden chamber on the 2nd floor and walked in, he saw Yi Feng staring at the person in front of him tensely. On seeing Xiao Xiao, Yi Feng quickly stood up, lowered his head and said, "Master." Xiao Xiao waved his hand, whereupon Yi Feng bowed and left the room. As Jiang Ruan raised her head, Xiao Xiao seated himself opposite her and gazed at her while he asked, "What's wrong? Is there any kind of medicine that can restore one's complexion? Or is there some method to cause a person to become more charming like a seductive fairy?" Jiang Ruan asked, getting straight to the point. There were really too many things about Jiang Susu that were strange. Even if one only took her appearance in consideration, it was enough to give rise to suspicions. The face that had been badly lacerated by thorns and thistles no longer bore a single scar. Furthermore, Jiang Ruan had clearly seen that Jiang Susu had not applied any cosmetics on her face that day. To say that she had been miraculously healed was about right. Moreover, Jiang Susu's every movement had been deliberately executed to draw attention, which was even more strange. Since Xiao Xiao had medical expertise, and was also experienced and knowledgeable, it was possible that he could shed some light on the matter. Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan with slight misgivings. After a moment of deep thought, he nodded and said, "Yes, there is." Jiang Ruan was taken aback. "What is it?" "A kind of black art," Xiao Xiao said. "South Xinjiang women are good at meishu, and the circumstances you've described are very possibly the result of practicing this kind of secret technique." Nanjiang could refer generally to the southern border, or specifically to South Xinjiang. Seems to refer to the method for women to cultivate charm to tempt or fascinate men, especially in the expression of the eyes and subtle body language. In a way, to be a femme fatale, it requires exercising one's qi life force and nourishing the blood. Jiang Ruan's heart sank. South Xinjiang. When Xiao Xiao saw her reaction, he said thoughtfully, "Is there such a person like this by your side? I want to ask Xiao Wangya, what does someone who practices this kind of technique have to do? What is the price? For example, does it require blood, or something along those lines?" Jiang Ruan asked. Not necessarily. There are many kinds of South Xinjiang black arts, but in regards to Meishu, the people who practice it are all different, so the price varies as well. In general, think of these secret techniques as a kind of medicine which fuses with the practitioner, and the deeper and stronger the fusion, the more remarkable the results. However, the price one has to pay will correspondingly be greater. The people who practice Meishu behave differently from ordinary people. Some of them require the replenishment of a little fresh blood, or it could be something else. However, it's really hard to say for sure, Xiao Xiao said as he patiently responded to her questions. Jiang Ruan's eyebrows gradually met in a frown. If she had been suspicious to some degree earlier, this suspicion had now grown significantly larger. In fact, Jiang Susu's abnormal behavior and her smooth and fair face mirrored some of the points that Xiao Xiao had just spoken of. However, she had only gone to the private temple to recuperate and restore her temperament, so how had this happened? The more Jiang Ruan thought about it, the more confused she became. As Xiao Xiao observed Jiang Ruan's frown, he naturally also began to ponder the matter. Thinking along these lines, Xiao Xiao said, "I want to see the person you are talking about for myself." Jiang Ruan began plotting how to bring Xiao Xiao into the Jiangfu to see Jiang Susu. Indeed, it was best for him to personally confirm if this situation had anything to do with the South Xinjiang. She was also slightly startled by Xiao Xiao because his words had caught her off guard. She had not expected that Xiao Xiao would actually want to handle this situation alongside her. She did not know that Xiao Xiao had been directed to deal with matters related to South Xinjiang. She simply thought that Xiao Xiao was acting very considerate. A faint emotion arose in her heart. It was not quite gratitude, but she increasingly felt that Xiao Xiao was not the cold-hearted and callous person that rumors made him out to be. She smiled faintly and said, "Of course that would be good. However, that person is not hidden but in the Jiangfu." Xiao Xiao looked at her, his elegant eyes as deep as the Milky Way. He said, "Jiang Susu. How did you know?" Jiang Ruan asked in astonishment. Among the ladies of the Jiangfu, only second Jiang Miss is described as being as beautiful as a fairy, so it has to be her, Xiao Xiao replied. Jiang Ruan was dumbfounded. She curled her lips in a smile and asked, "Xiao Wangya also considers second sister to be as beautiful as a fairy?" It seemed as though Xiao Xiao had been caught off guard by such an abrupt question from Jiang Ruan. He frowned, looked at her seriously and said, "Not as much as you." This kind of reply from Xiao Xiao truly went beyond her expectations. Although Jiang Ruan was generally at peace with herself, to hear such a cold and detached person say such words put her into something of a daze. For a while, she did not know what to say in response. When she looked up at him again, she discovered that he was looking at her with interest, with a teasing glint in his eyes. Since he was still smiling, was this a joke? After a moment's blankness, Jiang Ruan smiled and said, "So, it turns out that Xiao Wangya also knows how to crack a joke." Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows and asked, "When should I go to your residence?" Jiang Ruan felt that this conversation seemed to be a little weird, so she thought briefly before saying, "Why not tonight?" Yi Feng, who was standing outside the private room with his ear pressed to the door, nearly had to sit down because his legs had turned soft. The delicate and pretty maidservant next to him also could not stop herself from signaling to him with raised eyebrows. Where was the master who was ordinarily pure in heart and mind? The first thing he did upon returning was to visit a young lady's residence, and this future young foreign was also a heroine who was not the slightest bit bashful, and even fixed the time as tonight. Were they about to become husband and wife? Xiao Xiao said, "Fine. Tonight between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. I'll come and look for you." Jiang Ruan looked at him as she asked, "How will you get into the Fu?" Although Xiao Xiao had said that his martial art skills were outstanding, the Jiangfu was not like a playhouse. Moreover, to meet with someone in the dead of night in her own home, who was in fact a young man, would naturally be seen as not quite acceptable. However, both of them were not ordinary people. Although Jiang Ruan felt a little strange, She was definitely not going to act as pedantic and inflexible as she did in her previous life. Besides, she was eager to figure out what exactly was going on with Jiang Su. Guojia. A children's role-playing/make-believe game. Playing house. No need to worry. At the appointed time, I will come and look for you, Xiao Xiao said. Zhang Ruan thought for a moment before nodding and saying, in that case, many thanks to Xiao Wangya. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, standing to the side, did not make any sound or movement, but exchanged glances. Their young miss was trusting Xiao Wangya more and more. As her personal maidservants, they knew her temperament the best. From the moment she had regained consciousness after falling into the water at the rural residence, she had become extremely vigilant, and had never easily trusted the people around her. She was still slightly reserved even when interacting with the family of her own maternal grandfather, Zhao Guang. Even though this Xiao Wangye could be said to be somewhat cold and detached, he had helped Zhang Ruan tremendously countless times. Both maidservants reckoned that if the two of them could marry, it would undoubtedly be much better than being married off to someone else. Zhang Ruan had no idea that her personal maidservants had already unceremoniously sold her off. She lowered her head and drank her tea, thinking that as long as she could figure out Jiang Su's secret, the haze which had clouded her heart recently would be lifted substantially. To bring this kind of makeup that's not fit for public view to me, is this Missy so foolish? Get lost. A round container was flung out, landing with a loud paw, whereupon the finely ground powder within was scattered all over the ground, leaving minute traces suspended in the air. With great destructive force, Zhang Li swept all the items off her table, yelling, bunch of useless fools. Shi Lu, her maidservant, consoled her by saying, Miss, don't be angry. In a few days the people from Zhualangzhong's Fu will arrive. At that time, Miss will be so beautiful, and will go with them happily. It was better not to have said anything. At her words, Zhang Li erupted in anger and said, I really don't understand. How is it that I'm not good enough, such that the Zhou family is still so dissatisfied? They are still acknowledging that sickly, useless seedling. Shi Lu persuaded, Zhualangzhong is a good person who always abides by his promises. I believe he is merely showing respect for the promise he made to 4th Mississippi. When Miss is married to him, he will naturally treat Miss well. Seriously, he's just mistaking fish eyes for pearls, Jiang Li said furiously. 3 years ago, at the Imperial Palace banquet, Zhualangzhong had rescued Zhang Dan and had later sent for a matchmaker to propose marriage. Then, after Second Yinyang spoke at length with Zhang Quan, the candidate for the proposed marriage shifted from Zhang Dan to Zhang Li, who knew that Zhualangzhong would turn out to be an honest and serious-minded person. When he became aware of this matter, he became highly indignant. At that time, the Gung Tai had already been exchanged, and the pair's 8-character birth dates had already been calculated to be in harmony, so it was not good to back out of the promise. Who would have expected that Zhualangzhong would make a counter-demand? Every time Zhang Li thought about this, she ended up being absolutely enraged. Zhualangzhong had gone so far as to make it clear to Zhang Quan that he was willing to marry Zhang Dan as his Ping Qi. Ping Qi. This refers to a polygamous marital arrangement where a man has multiple regular wives. All the wives have the same legal and social status. Technically, therefore, the Ping Qi would not have to defer to the first wife, but would still have to accord her respect as the elder. The status of the Ping Qi is above that of a concubine. Sisters working together to serve one husband. This news would certainly capture the interest and imagination of many, and would spread far and wide as a result. However, Zhang Li had always been a person of little tolerance, and was naturally unwilling to accept this situation. In addition, Zhang Quan was also reluctant to have 2 daughters enter Zhualangzhong's Fu. But the greatest surprise was Zhang Dan. Before Zhang Quan and Zhang Li could tell her what to do and how to behave, she had already taken the initiative to reject this kind of marital arrangement. Immediately, the capital city was abuzz with talk of how the Jiangfu's 4th Shu daughter was unable to discriminate between good and bad, even going so far as to disdain the offer of being the Ping Qi of Zhualangzhong's Fu. In truth, with Zhang Dan's status, being able to become a part of Zhualangzhong's Fu, let alone as a Ping Qi, was already akin to a little bird flying to a higher branch to become a phoenix. Oh. The day before her return to the Fu, Jiang Su, had undergone the coming-of-age ceremony to indicate she had reached marriageable age 6. After that, all that was required was for Zhongli to undergo the same ceremony. Then they would be able to begin arranging matters related to her marriage. Zhuolangzhong would be present to personally witness the ceremony, and while this was a good thing, who would have expected at this precise time for Zhongli to begin making a fuss about nothing? 6. GG. To reach marriageable age, i.e. 15 years old. The coming-of-age ceremony, one of the most important ceremonies in ancient Chinese culture, was set in the Zhou dynasty, 1046 BC, 256 BC. Started by nobles and then widely applied by civilians, it was a ceremony that declared one had become an adult that was ready to get married, to take relevant responsibilities and inherit power and titles. The most common age to hold the ceremony was 20 for men and 15 for women in ancient China. During the coming-of-age ceremony, respected elders would put special hats on a man's head, or tie up the hair of a woman using hair ornaments named ji/zan, and dress with relevant robes or accessories. More here. What's more, the fuss was for no other reason than she abjectly rejected the rouge that had been sent to her courtyard. Although second Yinyang was no more than a Yinyang, she still had some spare money of her own. Besides, she only had this one daughter, and was thus naturally willing to spend on her. This rouge was a first-class product from the top store in the capital city that she had previously used without complaint, but was now unhappy with at this time. In truth, the reason for this was quite simple. Over the past 3 years, only Zhang Li and Zhang Dan had been in the Jiangfu. From the moment that Zhang Dan had been denied the proposed marriage, she had become closed up and reserved, and almost never left her courtyard. Therefore, everyday social niceties that took place in the Jiangfu, as well as the soirees in the capital, were mostly attended by Zhang Li. It was as if, during these few years, Zhang Li had regarded herself as the Jiangfu's daughter. Who could have anticipated that Zhang Susu and Zhang Ruan would return without warning? There was no need to talk about Zhang Ruan. In the blink of an eye, not only had she transformed into the Junju 7, she also had the protection of the Zhao family. As for Zhang Susu, instead of returning in shame after her stay at the private temple, she grew more beautiful by the day. 7. Junju could refer to the daughter of a crown prince or daughter of kings, depending on the dynasty. Title commonly conferred on the daughter of a Qinhuang, prince of the first rank. Translated, commandery princess or princess of the third rank. With both the jewel-like Zhang Ruan and Zhang Susu present, Zhang Li's haughty appearance became something of a joke. Naturally, as a result of this, she found fault with everything. Clenching her fists tightly, she said, "So what about the coming-of-age ceremony? With those two in the forefront, everyone will be looking at them. Who is going to look at me?" "Miss, you must not say such things," Shilu said softly. "Eldest Miss is now the Junju. But it can be dangerous at the top 8. Within the palace, it's easy to say something wrong, so who knows what will happen in future. As for second Miss, there's no need to worry about her. Even though it's been 3 years, the circumstances which sent her to the private temple are still talked about. In future, it will be difficult to arrange a marriage for her. Right now, within the Jiangfu, Miss is the one who lives the most unrestrained life. Once you have completed the ceremony, Zhuolangzhong will marry you. This marriage is something which Master has no control over. And wouldn't it be wonderful if you were to be married before eldest Miss and second Miss?" 8. Banjun Ru Ban Hu. Being close to the emperor can be as perilous as lying with a tiger. When Zhang Li heard her maidservant's words, she felt herself calm down. "You are right, what should I be anxious about? At least, the husband I marry is better than the both of them." As Shilu continued to console her, Zhang Li's state of mind finally settled. Having said this, Xiao Xiao reached out his hand, grabbed the back of Zhang Ruan's collar, and leaped out of the window before she could utter a sound. Completely startled, Zhang Ruan unconsciously wound her arms around his waist. The wind whistled by her ears and her heart was full of tension. This type of tension was not the sort she experienced daily as she schemed against others, which was a sort of pressure that built up gradually and became more palpable with each step. It was a kind of pure emotion, a slight fear felt because one had encountered the unknown. It was the kind of tension she had experienced when Zhao Mei was still alive, When Zhang Xing had surreptitiously slipped out of the fu with her to visit the temple fair, the kind of tension that came from the fear of discovery as they squirmed through the dog hole they had dug. Within that tension was a little frisson of excitement, as if returning to the time when there was no need to be worried about anything. That long-absent kind of stimulation caused her to forget the fear of being carried through the air, and she was left slightly dazed. Xiao Xiao noticed Zhang Ruan's unusual silence and could not help but lower his head to carefully look at her. He saw that her charming and lovely little face looked a little bewildered and helpless, but a sense of cautious longing was also present. This was poles apart from the customary quiet and peaceful appearance, and was what a young lady her age should look like. He had so rarely seen Zhang Ruan this way, and was momentarily somewhat taken aback. His eyes fell on her arms tightly encircling his waist. Her soft and slender fingers were closely gripping his pitch-black clothes, which made them appear even more like white and lustrous jade. For some unknown reason, he felt that his waist, encircled by those arms, was inexplicably hot. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Xiao used his martial arts skills to transport Zhang Ruan along with him, as he dropped into the middle of a courtyard. When Zhang Ruan had steadied herself enough to release her hands and take in their location, she was dumbstruck. They were in Su Xian Yuan. She glanced at Xiao Xiao suspiciously and said, "How did you know how to get here? Is it possible that you've been here before?" Xiao Xiao found his way in and out of the Jiangfu as if he were merely wandering into an uninhabited land, and he was able to locate Jiang Susu's courtyard with ease. All this readily led to one having misgivings about him. Xiao Xiao. Although this was actually not the first time he had visited Su Xian Yuan, the previous time had been when Zhang Ruan had castrated Li Yang. He had watched the entire scene unfold from a tree, and in the end had even helped her. However, right now was not a good time to disclose this. Genie checked and drew a map for me, he explained. Zhang Ruan nodded and said, "So, it's like that." Her expression showed that she did not fully believe him, and Xiao Xiao felt even more helpless. Both of them walked to a corner of the courtyard. Behind Jiang Susu's room was a small empty room. As they went round the back of the empty room, they suddenly heard a peculiar sound. The unexpected sound undulated somewhat in the night air, but it was still possible to make out that it sounded like something was struggling vigorously and flopping around on the ground, giving rise to a loud noise. Xiao Xiao frowned. He picked up a pebble from the ground and shot it through the window, noiselessly leaving a small hole behind. Xiao Xiao moved forward to look and his expression gradually became grave. On seeing this, Zhang Ruan patted his shoulder, whereupon he moved back and Zhang Ruan placed her eye to the hole. Then she saw such a scene that she found it hard to breathe. A faint light was shining in the room, but it was enough for her to see what was happening. Someone was holding something and was gnawing at it with a lowered head. When this person turned her head, everything became clear. The item in her hand was a hen with its feathers all in disarray. The hen's neck was almost broken through, and its feathers were drenched in blood as it died. That person's fair skin was almost supernaturally pale and her eyes were trance-like. She wore white clothes and her appearance was exquisite like that of a fairy. However, her mouth was stained with blood, like a malicious ghost feeding on a corpse. Oh! It was Jiang Susu. Chapter 107 Happy Occasions. Chapter 107 Happy Occasions. Please note, this is a work of fiction. Get a second opinion if you're unsure about medical advice. Consuming medications without research and the guidance of a licensed trained professional is not safe or recommended. Also, secretly giving medications to others or performing medical acts/procedures is dangerous, unlawful, and potentially life-threatening. Zhang Ruan could not tear her eyes away, but suddenly the sound of footsteps could be heard from outside. Xiao Xiao's expression immediately changed, and he grabbed Zhang Ruan's arm to pull her to hide behind the door of a side room. It was Hu Dai. She walked into the room and walked out again soon after, holding the dead chicken. Next she dug a pit under the plum tree in the courtyard and buried the animal there. From her practiced movements, it could be deduced that this was clearly not the first time she had done this. As Zhang Ruan's thoughts churned in her mind, in a moment of carelessness, the dangling ornament she wore in her hair became entangled with Xiao Xiao's collar. It was then that she realized how close they were to one another. The faint scent of green bamboo that emanated from Xiao Xiao's body, and the ice-cold material of his clothes gave her an unexpected sense of serenity. Soon after Hu Dai left the room, the person within doused the light. It seemed as though this person could brazenly fall asleep even after doing all that. When they could no longer hear any sounds, Xiao Xiao lifted Zhang Ruan like before and returned to Ruanju. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, who had been anxiously waiting in the room, heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the pair return safely. They realized that Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan had matters to discuss, so they quickly withdrew, shutting the door behind them and presumably keeping watch outside. Xiao Xiao sat in front of the table. Zhang Ruan poured him a cup of cold tea and asked, "Just now you saw everything clearly. Was she practicing Meishu?" "Yes," Xiao Xiao said as he received the tea. His eyes fixed on the tea leaves floating on the surface of the cup. "She has been practicing it for quite a while already. After a period of time, there will be no need for the chicken blood." Zhang Ruan frowned. 3 years ago, Jiang Su had entered the private temple. So how on earth had she come into contact with South Xinjiang and its black arts? She said, "How did this practice of the South Xinjiang make its way to the Central Plains?" Xiao Xiao's eyebrows rose as he said, "Someone is secretly helping Jiang Su. "Helping or making use of her?" asked Zhang Ruan. Xiao Xiao shook his head. "Until we find that person, everything is a potential variable in the equation." Zhang Ruan lowered her head. Xiao Xiao observed her seriously. From his angle, he could see her slender neck. Perhaps it was because the lamplight caused people to be illuminated with a softer glow, or because Zhang Ruan's attitude towards him this night had been warm, but she was completely different from her ordinarily disaffected persona. At present, her frown made him feel as though an expression like that should never be seen on her face, and consequently raised the desire to help her with anything. Thus, before Xiao Xiao had even figured out what he was thinking, he heard his own detached voice saying, "The Jiangfu is no longer safe. I will find someone to stay by your side and protect you." Zhang Ruan was slightly taken aback and quickly replied, "There's no need. Jiang Su has embraced the black arts of the South Xinjiang people, and the South Xinjiang people are definitely not going to stop there. My guess is that they are already somewhere very close by, for Jiang Su will one day be put to good use. If there is a South Xinjiang person presently in the Jiangfu, your situation will be very dangerous." Xiao Xiao thought for a moment before continuing, "I will send a woman over." Zhang Ruan looked up at him. The young man before her was coldly handsome, yet was also highly considerate and thoughtful in all aspects. There was no question that to have someone trained in martial arts beside her was indeed very tempting. If something could be exploited, then it was best to exploit it in full. She paused in thought before responding, "Many thanks." Xiao Xiao nodded. He said, "I'll return home first. Tomorrow I'll send that person over." Xiao Xiao watched as she nodded. In the next second, he leaped out of the window and in the blink of an eye disappeared into the night. When she called Lian Xiao and Bai Ji in, both maidservants expressed a sense of wonder. "How did Xiao Wangye disappear so quickly? We have been watching the door very closely and no one has gone through." Zhang Ruan shook her head. Xiao Xiao truly knew the Jiangfu inside out. He was graceful even when his actions were like those of a thief. Surely he was unique in the entire Great Jin dynasty. On thinking about the person Xiao Xiao would send over the next day, she felt her curiosity piqued. Lian Xiao saw that it was very late and hurriedly said, "Miss, why don't you go to bed and get up later tomorrow morning?" Then having said this, she helped Zhang Ruan to her bed before extinguishing the lamp and withdrawing from the room. Liangshang Junzi. Lit. The gentleman who hides on the roof beam. Fig a thief. Because she had slept so late the night before, the next day, Zhang Ruan only roused at 9 in the morning. When Lian Xiao brought in water so Zhang Ruan could freshen up, she seemed to want to say something, but hesitated. Zhang Ruan noticed her behavior and said, "What's the point of choking yourself? If something has happened, say what it is." Rishan Sengan. Lit. The sun is as high as 3 bamboo poles, denotes that it is late, possibly 8 or 9 in the morning. Lian Xiao blinked and said, "Miss Fifth-Yang is expecting." So fast. Zhang Ruan was strangely not that surprised. Instead she smiled and said, She has really grasped the situation well. Misanticipated that Fifth Yang would make her move so quickly? Lian Xiao asked in amazement. She's not stupid. The longer she waits, the greater her risk, Zhang Ruan said dispassionately. Hong Ying's greatest trait was her intelligence. She could clearly analyze and delineate the pros and cons of a situation decisively. Now that Xia Yan was pregnant, she was the most important mistress of the Jiangfu. No matter how much, or not Zhang Quan doted on Xia Yan, if she were to have a little young master she would inevitably use him as her trump card. Then at that time Hong Ying would find herself on a dead-end road. Just look at the fate of Hong Ying in her last life. In this one all Zhang Ruan had to do was to make a brief mention, and Hong Ying immediately figured everything out. If Xia Yan really did make a move, and if there was also a child in Hong Ying's belly, Zhang Quan would not act rashly for the sake of the child. Like this, a child was Xia Yan's trump card, and at the same time Hong Ying's escape from death card. Mian Si Pai. Lit. Escape death tablet /sign. In ancient times, the emperor could bestow a certificate upon ministers who had rendered valuable public service, granting them and their family members immunity from prosecution for generations. What would Xia Yan's expression be when she heard the news of Hong Ying's pregnancy? In Yan Huayuan. With an abrupt movement, Xia Yan flung the cup in front of her to the ground, where it shattered into a myriad of pieces. Are you sure? Does she really have the happy pulse? T/N. Happy pulse means the pulse of a pregnant woman. More here. The middle-aged man clad in brown holding a medicine box stood before Xia Yan and said, "This humble person has taken her pulse, and she does indeed have the happy pulse. Bitch. She actually went and got pregnant." Xia Yan erupted angrily. Hong Ying had clearly drunk the contraceptive medicine under the watchful eye of her trusted servant, Li Momo, so they never expected to hear such happy news. This meant that Hong Ying had never digested the medicine. Therefore, even if she wanted to intervene in this situation, it was already too late. Her eyes landed on the physician in front of her, and she made a sudden decision. "Doctor, do you know any method that would cause a person to miscarry unknowingly?" This physician treated furins and young ladies in the big houses all year round, so he naturally was experienced in such matters. In a low voice he replied, "Yes, there are methods, but..." "Then I shall have to inconvenience you, doctor," Xia Yan said as she touched her gold hairpin. "When you succeed in this matter, this foreign will of course show her gratitude handsomely." The physician's face brightened considerably. On seeing this, Xia Yan's eyes flashed with sinister intent. Was being newly pregnant really a cause for joy? Even for the people of high rank in the imperial palace, whether their children were able to grow up without mishap was something no one could predict with any certainty. What more a child which had yet to be born? For a concubine who had come from a brothel who wanted to have a child, it remained to be seen whether she would have this kind of good fortune. The happiest people in the Fu were Jiang Quan and old Jiang Madam. Only, old Jiang Madam's condition was deteriorating with each passing day. Her health was not at all as it used to be. Her moments of lucidity were few, and she tired after speaking for a brief moment. Nonetheless, Jiang Quan was extremely happy. Although he had 4 daughters, he only had 2 sons, Jiang Xing and Jiang Chao, and he had never truly regarded Jiang Xing as his son. No matter how high his position was within the palace, even if he shone like the sun at noon within the great Jin dynasty, there was no way Jiang Quan could control him. Moreover, even though Jiang Chao was currently working under Xian Li, the fact of his having failed the imperial examination and later the trouble he had raised at Bai Feng Lu, together with his association with the Grand Counselor Fu which had caused him to become the laughingstock of the capital, resulted in Jiang Quan subconsciously viewing him with much disappointment. Who could have known that Xia Yan, despite being over 40 years of age, would become pregnant? This made him tremendously happy. His cherished wish had been fulfilled, that Jiang Fu would have another little young master, but who could have anticipated that Hong Ying would also conceive at this time? He was so very pleasantly surprised. Although Hong Ying had come from a brothel, she was gentle and sensible, and she had the grace and lofty character which Xia Yan did not possess. If she could bear a son like herself, brimming over with talent, he would regard the boy with the utmost care, even though he would be a Shu son. Xia Yan was dignified, Hong Ying was aloof. His beautiful wife and concubine were expecting. His family was expanding. He considered himself pleased with his official career. His life was indeed good. Jiang Quan thus lost himself in his beautiful daydream, little imagining that his beautiful concubine was in her courtyard swallowing a special medicinal draught. Her maidservant, Pinger, asked, "Yinyang, do you need more water?" Hongying shook her head. She had spent a huge sum of money to procure these medicinal ingredients. When they were steeped, then drunk, the draught helped produce the symptoms of pregnancy in such a way that a physician would have no clue it was an artificially induced reaction, and so the diagnosis of a happy pulse was given. She had already deceived the Fu's physician, and the physician Xia Yan invited had also not noticed anything peculiar, so it could be assumed that she could rest easy for a period of time. Slowly she relaxed. Her eyes skimmed over the mound of tonics on the shelf which Jiang Quan had sent over, and a smug smile emerged on her face. Jiang Ruan was just thinking about when to visit Hongying, when she heard the little servant girl from the main entrance running in to tell Luzhu Jiejia, a young lady is kneeling at the front door of the Fu, and wants to see eldest Mississippi. Jiang Ruan walked out to ask the servant, "Looking for me? Who is it?" The servant girl shook her head as she replied, "I don't know. But she's dressed like a person from a common family and she's very fair. She only said that she's looking for eldest miss to pay a debt of gratitude, and refuses to say more." Jiang Ruan recalled Xiao Xiao's words the previous night. After a moment's consideration she said, "All right, I will go and take a look." As soon as she walked to the main entrance, she saw a young girl kneeling at the gate of the Jiangfu, looking to be about 17 or 18 years old. She was dressed all in green and her head was bowed. There was already a large crowd of people outside the main gate, waiting to watch the excitement unfold. Why on earth had this young lady come to the Fu? Jiang Ruan walked across and asked, "Are you looking for me?" When the young girl heard Jiang Ruan's voice, she looked up, exposing her delicate and pretty little face, which was indeed very fair. She said, "Tianju has come to fulfill the vow of that day, and will serve Miss from this time forward." Jiang Ruan raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "Sure enough," the young girl said, "at that time, Tianju's parents were killed by bandits, and Tianju wanted to sell herself to earn the money to bury them but ended up getting tangled up with scoundrels. Fortunately, Miss intervened to help, otherwise Tianju would have been utterly ruined by them, completely devoured until not even bones remained. Miss simply gave Tianju money to bury Tianju's parents, but never said anything further before departing. Miss is Tianju's benefactor, and today at long last, Tianju has found her benefactor, and is willing to serve Miss forever." On hearing these words, the crowd came to an understanding of the situation. It seemed that the Jiang family's eldest daughter, with the heart of a bodhisattva, had rescued this young girl and departed without making known her name. It was thus fortunate that the one who received the help understood the principle of repaying back double, the grace that had been given, and had quickly come to the door of her benefactor to repay her debt of grace. Di Shuijian Deng Yong Quan Xiang Bao. Lit. The grace of dripping water should be repaid by a gushing spring. Fig. The kindness shown in even the smallest favor should be repaid with a much greater extent of grace/action, especially in times of difficulty. Jiang Ruan observed the girl who claimed her name to be Tianju. Grief and gratitude played in tandem across her face, giving the impression that she was truly there to repay her debt. It was indeed an excellent act. However, Jiang Ruan was at a loss for words. What did Xiao Xiao mean by fabricating such a backstory for Tianju? Was it possible that he had also wanted to include praise of her character in order to raise her reputation among the common people? It made no difference to her. She was used to being called a beautiful woman or even an enchantress, but this label of Bodhisattva's heart was truly not fitting for her. "Since you are bent on repaying your debt of gratitude, I am also unwilling to make you go back," Jiang Ruan said with a faint smile. "So you may stay by my side." The onlookers were all thunderstruck at her straightforward speech and action. There was something unbelievable about this. According to convention, most people should have said something along the lines of, "I did not rescue you in order to have you indebted to me, you should go back," and so on, but Jiang Ruan had so readily accepted her offer. Didn't that mean that all the girl's previous rhetoric had been in vain? However, this girl was only stunned for an instant. In accordance with the situation, she said, deferentially, "Please, would Miss confer a name?" "There's no need. Your original name sounds very nice. Let it remain Tianju." Tianju nodded and responded, "Yes, Mississippi." After Zhang Ruan signaled for the onlookers to disperse, she brought her newly and cheaply acquired servant girl back to her courtyard. As Zhang Ruan walked into Ruanju, Lu Zhu was watering the flowers outside. She noticed Tianju and blinked once or twice before curiously assessing her. Tianju followed Zhang Ruan into the room, whereupon Lin Xiao and Baiji took their leave and shut the door, leaving Zhang Ruan and Tianju alone. Zhang Ruan carefully sized up the girl before her. With just the two of them in the room, Tianju ceased to be as docile and humble as she had been at the main entrance. She gave off a cold aura, seeming in this way to be Xiao Xiao's reflection to some extent. "Oh." She raised her eyebrows and asked, "How long have you been with him?" 10 years, Tianju responded quickly without raising her head. "Master saved my life, and he asked me to come and protect Mississippi. Since your master has given you to me, from now onwards, your master is no longer Xiao Xiao but me. If there should come a day when I want you to betray Xiao Xiao, you can only obey me," Zhang Ruan said impassively. Startled, Tianju abruptly looked up. As it turned out, she was harboring plenty of misgivings. The entire genie guard was buzzing with curiosity about the identity of the girl who had caused Master to punish Yifeng for 3 whole years. However, rumors were all they heard, for only those who had been specially tasked to make inquiries about Zhang Ruan knew anything about her. She had been very young when Xiao Xiao had brought her back to the genie guard, and she was considered one of their most outstanding members. Although she was a female, her martial arts skills were not in the least inferior. That Xiao Xiao wanted to send her to be the personal guard of a young miss from the family of a court official was initially somewhat difficult for her to accept. The uniquely frank and straightforward manner with which Zhang Ruan had accepted her at the Fu's main entrance earlier had startled her, but she found this current statement to be even more incredible. She met Zhang Ruan's gaze and couldn't help but feel a sense of shock. What kind of gaze was this, utterly cold yet profound, as if she could peer straight into someone's soul and subject it to careful scrutiny? They had learned to kill from the time they were young, and only killers had such ice-cold eyes. But this eldest miss of the Zhang family could not possibly be a killer. Under Zhang Ruan's coldly detached yet scrutinizing gaze, she felt a tinge of unease. She pursed her lips and remained silent. "I understand it's hard to let go of one's old master," Zhang Ruan said without emotion. "But Tianju, you have to remember, if you are unable to regard me as your master now, then in the same way, I will also be unable to regard you as my trusted aide. As my personal maidservant who knows martial arts, I may ask you to undertake some errands, but I will not be able to treat you with sincerity until you are able to regard me as your master." These straightforward words would cause anyone's heart to turn cold. So too this young lady who was unwilling to lie to others, felt her resolve tremble slightly. After a considerable silence she replied, "Tianju understands." Zhang Ruan tapped the teacup in front of her and said, "Observe my second younger sister's courtyard for the next few days, as well as Foreign's courtyard." Tianju lowered her head and said, "Yes." The days passed by as they usually did, as if everything was tranquil. Zhang Quan was busy with official business every day, and Zhang Chao was rarely in the Fu. Xia Yan and Hong Ying stayed in their courtyards all day in order to nurture their fetuses in peace, and there was surprisingly no conflict. Jiang Susu also re-emerged, but she had mellowed considerably compared to her previous arrogant and willful temperament. Even old Jiang Madam praised her, saying that her going to the private temple had been the right course of action, since she was now increasingly displaying a Buddha nature, and her temperament was more gentle than before. In this way, the events of 3 years ago were all blamed on the demon who had possessed her. If there was anything of note, it would be Zhang Li and Zhang Dan's coming-of-age ceremony. Zhang Li's ceremony was exceedingly lively and full of excitement, as second Yinyang had always been somewhat garish. Because Zhang Ruan and Zhang Susu's ceremonies had not been held in the capital city, Zhang Li's ceremony was arranged as if she were a daughter. People from Zhualangzhong's Fu also attended, but they did not say anything, and the wedding date was set for the end of summer this year. The principal reason was that Zhualangzhong was no longer young, and the Fu had been pressing him on the issue. What's more, this marriage had been decided 3 years ago, so there was nothing left for either family to bring up. Zhang Dan also made an appearance on the day of Zhang Li's coming-of-age ceremony, but there was nary the slightest sign of unwillingness. She appeared exceedingly acquiescent, and offered her sincere wishes to Zhang Li upon her coming of age. As a result, those who had once disdained Zhang Dan began to feel that this Shu daughter was actually very gentle and moderate, as well as highly magnanimous. In a trice, she had gained the good opinion of many. However, Zhang Dan's ceremony could not compare to Zhang Li's. Because Xia Yan and Hong Ying were both expecting, old Zhang Madam was not in good health, and eldest Yinyang had been virtually invisible in the Fu for a good many years. The responsibility for organizing Zhang Dan's ceremony fell on second Yinyang. There was no way, in any circumstance, that second Yinyang would allow Zhang Dan's ceremony to overshadow Zhang Li's. And so, the ceremony that day was very perfunctorily conducted. Despite this, Zhang Dan maintained a gracious expression on her face throughout, and no unhappiness could be detected at all. Zhang Ruan watched her with a faint smile. Zhang Dan's thoughts and inclinations were becoming more profound with each passing day. Zhang Quan regarded her as well-behaved and obedient, but Zhang Ruan knew her fourth younger sister was definitely not that simple. However, setting aside all these matters, the days passed extremely comfortably. It was as if the Jiangfu had always been a warm and harmonious family, instead of a dangerous and bloody battlefield. By the time the flowering season for the peach trees in front of the door had passed, Xia Yan's belly was completely obvious, and her body began to respond in other ways. Her appetite became very good, and her body grew more plump. The effects of the pregnancy were more pronounced than when she had carried Jiang Su and Jiang Chao. Perhaps it was because she was advanced in age, but she did especially attach any importance to maintaining herself, so she was nothing like the graceful and attractive woman of the past. Although pregnant herself, Hong Ying had blossomed, becoming even more tender and beautiful. Who knew if it was due to the pregnancy, but her complexion had become quite rosy. In contrast to Xia Yan, although her pregnancy had also begun to show, she took care of herself daily. Compared with her previous aloof appearance, contrary to expectation, her pregnant figure exuded some degree of feminine charm, and she grew more alluring with lustrous black hair and supple skin. A somewhat nicely plump wife on one hand, and an alluring concubine on the other. Normally, Zhang Quan was not someone who coveted beautiful women, but when all is said and done, men are fond of what is fresh and beautiful. Besides, Xia Yan had already borne him Jiang Su and Jiang Chao, whereas this was his first child with Hong Ying. So even though Zhang Quan ordered his people to look after Xia Yan with the utmost care, his visits to Hong Ying's courtyard grew in frequency. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.